Good? Nice. So who's been in this room before today? Any good sessions? Yeah? I like them as well. Yeah. All right. So as you can see, the room's still filling up. I didn't get we have to start now yet, so room manager is not looking at me angrily. Don't do that to me. So while we still have a minute or two with people dropping in, I always like WordCamps because you get to meet new people. That means that if you're sitting next to someone you don't already know, now's the time to introduce yourself, make new friends. If you're not sitting next to anyone, scoot over and make sure that you sit next to a new person. It's awesome. And it will also help clearing the aisles a bit, because if people come in late, you don't want them to have to move to the middle. So please be nice, scoot in a bit, move to the middle of the row. And that will allow others coming in to also find a seat, even if they're late. Because it's quite a walk from the lunch area here. All right, so of course I'm super well prepared, so I need my phone. There's all the introductions, so I'm not twittering, I'm not checking Facebook. It's really all for you. Still see a lot of people coming in. Yeah, almost. Yeah, let's just start in a minute, right?
The slides. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're late? All right, come in, find a seat. We're going to start with our first speaker of this afternoon. She's been building websites since '93, when her dad brought home an AOL disk and a dial-up modem. In 2005, she started using WordPress as a blogging platform for both herself, for the college radio station at the University of Minnesota. And she became a freelancer and used WordPress in some of the first websites she built for her customers. Today, she's a proud mom, mom of 2, and runs a WordPress website development agency with 9 full-time employees in Minnesota, named Iceberg Web Design. Her official job title is therefore Master Penguin. Please put your hands together for the amazing Jessie Gurr.
Thank you all for coming today. We're big on branding, and so you're going to see a lot of penguins here. If you care to take note, a lot of them are labeled. This rockhopper penguin will be starting us off with our project management for developers. So yeah, a little bit of my background. I started off as a solopreneur. I developed websites, and I also sold websites, and I also project managed websites. And so we all kind of know the age-old tale. So a little story here, totally hypothetical situation. Let's say we've got a customer, and we've got a developer, and they start having a good conversation with each other. And the customer says, hey, I need a website. And the developer says, hey, that's great, I can get you a website. How many pages do you need? And the customer says, oh, maybe about 7 pages, home, about, a photo gallery, nothing too big. And the developer's like, hey, that's great. I'll go ahead and do that for you. You know, when do you need it? A month would be good, right? Not too bad. So 3 days before the website's set to go live, developer reaches out to his customer and, says, hey, great news, your website's ready. Give it one last pass through. And the customer says, oh, shoot, I've got 3 more products, and I feel like they really should have their own page. Can you just build out 3 more pages for me? I mean, super easy. Developer, of course, that's simple. I'll just clone the product page that we already have, change out the pictures, change out the content. We're good to go, right? So, calls up his customer again. Hey, your 10-page website is live. Customer says, wait, hold on a second. I was talking to Amy and Matt, and they feel like we really should have a team bio. I mean, we got 8 employees here. Like, we really should be talking about our employees, don't you think? And, you, as a developer, all right, what's 8 more pages? What's that going to do? I mean, whatever. We're going to, let's say we go live at the end of this week instead of today, and I'll get that in my schedule for you. And so we got 8 more pages, and hey, your website's done. And customer says, oh, that contact form. Wouldn't it be great if that contact form worked differently if a customer fills it out or a new lead fills it out? Can you just build in a little bit of conditional logic for me? Fun, gravity forms, easy peasy. Done. All right, time to go live. Oh, wait. Developer, I signed up for this great live chat service. This is going to change my business. Can you just put this little bit of code into the header? That's what they're telling me to do. And you all know how this works, right? Live chat integration, super, super simple. You take that little line of code that the customer gives you, and the next thing you know, you're on the phone with them because you need their login for their live chat service because they didn't send you the right code, and oh, the buttons don't match the color of the website, and all the little things. But hey, we're still going to go live because I'm staying up till 2 a.m., and I'm going to get this project done because I need it on my portfolio. And, 2 a.m., you type out that final email. All right, I'm going to bring your site live tomorrow. And you wake up in the morning, and you've got an email important in your inbox. Can you just add a contact form to the footer? Last request, promise. Anything sound familiar? Anyone? Total hypothetical story here. No one's had this solution before, no? So what do we end up with? We end up with a super happy customer. It's all about keeping the customers happy, isn't it? This is a great model to run yourself out of business. And this is kind of what I'm here to talk about today. I've lived this story. When I started to grow my team, I started by hiring developers because we had a need for developers. And exactly like this story, I let my developers interact directly with the customers because, hey, customer service, do what the customer wants, listen to the customer, help them out. I like to get a kind of a feel, how many people in this room are actually website developers? All right. How many of you guys interact directly with your customers? So that's almost everybody here. This is good. All right. Anyone not run into this situation before? For the video, yeah, no hands except for our social media writer over there. So, all right. So there's a lot that goes into project management. This talk is really geared towards you guys, towards the developer. I'm not going to go into the basics of Scrum. I'm not going to talk about all the different types of project management. What I'm going to talk about are some key points that you can bring home that you hopefully will be able to implement in your business on Monday that will help you prevent scope creep. We're going to talk a little bit about scope creep and ways that you can keep your workflow moving a little bit more smoothly. So to start out, kind of all the way back to the basics, we're starting about project management. So what is a project? Google's dictionary definition, but basically a project is, and this is key, a project is a temporary endeavor that has a set beginning, a set end, and its purpose is to create one unique product or one outcome. So a project is not, I have a new customer and they're my customer for 30 years. A project is, my customer needs a website by March 5th. Projects have a clear beginning and a clear end. You need to have a timeline on your projects. Projects can be ongoing. Oftentimes you want to maybe break those down into smaller projects. And also projects need to have a defined scope and resources needed to complete whatever outcome the customer is looking for. So this project management triangle we'll talk about a little bit more, but basically the scope of the project is what needs to be done, and the resources are the time and the quality that it takes, or the time and the cost that it takes to implement the scope of the project. So that's kind of a project overview. Management is basically the process of dealing with or controlling people or things. And so a manager has the power to make decisions. A manager has the responsibility to oversee a project and is responsible for its results. The project manager is essentially the person who is responsible for the success or the failure of a project. So a lot of you website developers out there, you kind of think about your job is to develop the website, but really, if you're talking to the customer as well, or if you're also project managing, you are responsible for whether or not your project is a success and your customer's happy, or a failure. And you can have a very happy customer on a failed project if your company takes a significant loss for it. And so this is the type of thing that I'm hoping you'll take from this. So back to that project management triangle. This is sometimes called the triple constraint triangle. The Project Management Institute talks a lot about this triple constraint and basically keeping that triangle as an equilateral triangle. So projects in general, they need to be delivered within the agreed cost. Nobody wants to buy a website and then find out after it goes live that they owe a lot more money for it than they signed up for. You need to deliver projects on time. Nobody wants to sign up for a project and then find out that their timeline has been extended by 3 months, even though you originally said that you could complete it in a month. And they need to meet the agreed scope, and the quality needs to meet or exceed customers' expectations. And so the key here is to keep that project management triangle equilateral. You define the scope, you figure out how long it's going to take and how many resources are needed to complete the project. And if any of those things change, the quality of the project will be compromised, or you need to change the other two as well. So this example here, if we have a project with a set cost, time, and scope, and the scope increases without changing the time and the cost of the project, what's going to happen is the quality will fail. So great example, I need a team section added to my website, but you only have one night to do it. What's going to happen? You're going to build out a team section that doesn't have appropriate header tags. It's going to have broken or missing links. It's going to maybe have some broken images just because you didn't increase the time or the cost to complete it. So, for everybody in this room, as a project manager, your job is to do those things. Make sure that the projects are completed on time, meet the scope, and meet the price. So you have to kind of take a step out. Now, all of you developers in the room, when you're talking on the phone with your customer, you're no longer a website developer. Sure you are. I mean, that's what you're going to go back and do. But you need to have a mind shift when you're talking with your customers and think of things from a little bit more of a project management angle. So when a customer says to you, hey, I just need some conditional logic on my form, sure, as a developer, that's super easy. But is it within the scope that you talked about? Is it adding a little bit of time? Once you start going down the wheel of adding a thing and adding another thing and adding another thing, you're changing the customer's expectations. You do one little addition above what's outlined in the proposal, and the customer all of a sudden realizes that they can get more things for you than you signed up for. And so they're going to come back again and again and again with small requests that eventually are going to lead to a pretty big problem. As a project manager, you're the project's leader, so it's your responsibility to lead yourself or your team to meet the objectives of your customer. You need to be able to balance competing objectives and get input from everybody who's involved with the project. So a great example of this, if you have a company that sells online and you've got two people in the room talking about how they want to handle shipping. And the guy who works in the shipping department says, well, we need to streamline shipping and we need to put everything in one box. And the guy who owns the company says, well, no, we need to not get overcharged for shipping, and so we need to sit down and, integrate with FedEx and USPS and UPS and figure out all of the best quotes. And so as the project manager, you need to have the ability to talk to both of the people on the team, get them to come to a decision, figure out the why. Why are you lobbying for this? Why are you lobbying for that? And figure out a solution that will meet both of their needs without taking more time or resources than were originally allotted. Asking customers, does it meet your goal? Are we still on track? Is this what you originally had in mind? Is a great way to communicate. Communication is key. A thing that we found out pretty early on into the careers, if you're talking with people who both If you're talking to two people, a decision maker in a company and a stakeholder in the company, and they're not the same person, you need to make sure that you get input from both of them. So if Joe is writing the check for your website design project, but he said that Molly has the ability to make all of the decisions, and you work just with Molly, at the end of the project, Joe comes back in and decides that he wants things changed. You need to define up front, who is the person that's making the decision, maybe get that in writing, and who is the actual stakeholder in your project so that things don't derail. And so that when the project's done, everybody is satisfied with the results. And as the project manager, oftentimes you just have to make decisions to keep the project moving. So some great skills for project managers to have. Problem solving is key skill. In this industry where things are very intangible, oftentimes you're going to have to come up with unique solutions to different problems. Motivation, if you're not motivated to keep a project on track, it's going to derail. Leadership skills are essential for project managers, especially if you are working with a team of other developers or if you are working with a team of clients and you need to help them move together to reach a common goal. Communication is key. Communication is the bulk of project management. Make sure you are able to write clear, concise emails. Make sure that you're able to talk on the phone. Make sure that whatever method your customer likes, you're available for. Negotiation, oftentimes negotiating over price, scope, quality, time is going to come into play a lot. If a customer wants more than they've asked for, then they need to either extend the timeline or increase the cost. And so you need to be pretty good at explaining that to the customer, negotiating with them either for more time on your project or for more resources. And customer service, of course, as a project manager, your primary goal is to make sure that the customers are happy throughout the entire project. A lot of other roles you might play that will come in as a project manager. You could be the billing department or the accounting department. Customers are going to call you halfway through their project and say, hey, where are we? Where are we with billing? How much would it cost to add on a team section? How much would it cost to put that conditional logic on the form? How many hours of consulting time have we used so far? So as a project manager, you need to be on top of that. If you have an external billing system, you might want to be in communication, hold weekly meetings, make sure that you're talking to the people who are managing the finances on a regular basis and communicating with developers and with the customers, where you're at with expenses on the project. You may be a sales agent. Hey, I need that team section. Sure, it's going to cost you X, Y, Z. As a project manager, actually, it's a great way to upsell your customers mid-project or push things to a phase 2. Hey, that would be great on your website. Let's do that later, and we'll get you a quote for that after the website's done. You might act as a hiring manager. Perhaps you are a freelancer and you outsource work to other developers from time to time when your schedule gets busy. You may have to hire them. Maybe you work on a team with website developers and you have to assign tasks to individual developers who are going to best fit each part of the project. Both of those things, you need to have a little bit of experience with delegating, figuring out who's best for the job and how to get them on board and make sure that they fit and that they have the availability to complete the project. And you may also be a purchasing manager. Figure out if using software that's been pre-purchased is cheaper than having an in-house developer do it. Maybe you want to buy a plugin. Maybe you need to do a little bit of research as the project manager. Who developed this plugin? How long has it been supported for? What happens with future updates and releases? Maybe you are given the ability to purchase premium licenses for e-commerce software or for form software to make the project run more smoothly. And then kind of back full circle to the accounting, if you are purchasing premium software for one of your customers, how does that fall into billing for the end user? Who holds the license? Do you buy a developer license? Do you make your customer buy the product and renew it? So all sorts of decisions that you need to make as you're building on a product. So scope creep. Has anyone here ever heard of the term scope creep? All right. Yeah, so this is the big thing, and this is the toughest part of project management that I've run into and that our team has run into, and I think in this industry, especially scope creep, it is a problem. So scope creep, for those of you who may not have heard, basically when a project starts to grow beyond what was originally included in the proposal, it is scope creep. And you know that scope creep has already happened when a project is starting to cost you more than you planned, if it's starting to take you more time than you planned. if you're starting to pull more staff members in than you had planned. This is running into scope creep. And so we're going to talk about some ways to stop scope creep before it starts, and then also how to handle scope creep once it's come up. And the most important thing that I can stress with scope creep is that it begins at the very beginning with the sale. So back to our hypothetical situation. Let's say we've got a nice sales guy, and he meets with a happy business owner, and they're having a discussion about building a website. And the sales guy says, oh, hey, I'm going to get you a quote, and I'm going to get you a quote for a 5-page website with a team bio section. And the customer doesn't hear him because she has all of these other things in her mind that she wants on her website. And she's just wanting the price that he's presented. And so she's got this idea, either she misheard something that he said, or maybe she's taking it in a different way, but they leave that conversation, and the customer is thinking, yeah, I'm going to get this great shopping cart. I'm going to have 10 forms on my website. They're all going to go to 10 different developers. And so sales guy goes back to the office, and he talks with his development team, and he says, great news, I just sold a website. And the development team says, great news, we're going to build that website that you just sold. And sales guy then, goes on his way, collects his commission check, and the developer is left speaking to the customer, who is pretty sure she bought more than the proposal stated. And so now it's the developer's job to manage the scope creep. So the first part, making sure that your sales staff understands what they're selling, but also building it out into a super crystal clear proposal. Make sure that your proposal is very specific. How many pages does your website need to have? Do you need contact forms? How many contact forms do you need? How many fields do each of your contact forms need? Are you going to be selling online? What payment systems are you going to take online? Just PayPal, or do you want to integrate with Authorize.net? Do you have a team section? Are you going to need team bios on your site? And make sure that your proposal is line itemed. And this is where one of my favorite graphics about project management. You want e-commerce? You want 10 forms on your website and you want it tomorrow? I mean, maybe we can do that for you, but it's not going to be cheap. Or you want to pay $2,000 for an e-commerce website? Sure, but you're not going to get it anytime this year. Right? So make sure that your sales team, whether that's you, whether you have an external sales team, is communicating very clearly with your customer, and go through the proposal line item, line by line, and explain exactly what it means. And always ask if the customer has questions about their proposal. If they have questions, bring it up. Don't be afraid to say, oh, that's not outlined in the proposal, but we can add it on. And then, now that you've got a clear proposal, your customer is signed up, before anybody starts working, make sure you explain your process. How do you work? Have a kickoff meeting. One thing that we do is we bring our customers into our office and we sit around a table. The person who sold the website is there, the project manager is there, and typically we'll bring a developer or a designer into the meeting at some point, depending on how big the project is, so that everybody's on the same page before anybody even writes a line of code. Determine how you want to communicate with each other. Some people prefer to talk on the phone. Some people prefer email. A lot of people prefer text today. Figure out how your customer wants to communicate. Figure out who you're going to be talking to during your project, and make sure that you have the line of communication open. And also set your expectations. What are we going to do for you, and what do you need to do for us in order to make this a successful project? Oftentimes, in our business, we'll sell websites, but the customer decides that they want to write their own content. So if you can deliver them a document that says, hey, here's an example of what we expect from you for content, this is our expectation that you will fill this out and send it back to us before we start working, or would you like to talk about purchasing content? After the kickoff meeting, you want to sit down and identify the major milestones. What are the big hurdles that have to become overcome in your project? Do you start with the design, and then you develop out a page, and then you develop a function? Where do you need approval on items? If you can make an outline of the project and highlight each of the milestones, Make note, especially where the customer needs to be involved, is key here. A lot of times customers don't understand that website development is a collaborative process, and they need to be pulled back into the conversation mid-development just so that their goals are being met. Winner items due. If you want to put dates on your timeline, you can, or you can say, you know, after every deliverable, you have X number of days to review and approve. But make it clear what you expect from your customers and how long things are going to take. If your customer has a day that they need their website live by, then you need to develop a timeline and adhere to it strictly, whether that's on your end or the customer's end, and make it super clear that, you know, if things fall or go off the rails, it's going to derail the project. Keeping the lines of communications clear. I think we've covered this a few times, but again, find out who the primary contact is. A great thing, if telephone or text is their preferred line of communication, always send a follow-up email. It's really good just to have things in writing so that you're documenting what's been said. So if you get on the phone with a customer and they say, I would like you to add 3 more pages to the website, and you say, all right, well, that's going to cost X, make sure you follow that up immediately with an email. Hey, per our conversation, you've requested that we add these 3 pages to your website. As discussed on the phone, we're going to charge this for it. Let us know if you have questions. Thanks for your business. Just so that if they come back at the end of their project with their final bill and they have any questions, you have documentation to reference. And then also communication, not just with you and the customer, but make sure that you're communicating directly with the members of your team. If any of your team members have direct access to your customers, it's always a good idea to be part of that conversation. So oftentimes we'll have developers hop on the phone directly with our customer just because it is so much easier for customers to explain what they're getting to a developer than to a project manager. But maybe get the project manager either on the phone or have the developer send a recap email stating what happened. You don't want to get yourself into a situation where your customer says, well, Joe said that I could have 8 team members, and you're telling me I can only have 5. What's going on? Because you don't want to fight with your customers. You don't want to get in that he said, she said. You want to keep the relationship strong, and you want to keep the communication clear. So make sure that internal communications are happening as well. And anytime that a red flag comes up, anytime your customer starts to request something out of scope, make sure you address it immediately. Address it politely, address it quickly and clearly, and define what needs to be done to make their request work. If you're having issues with customers continuing to request items, you know, maybe they're willing to pay for it. Maybe they're willing to extend the timeline for it. That's great. But maybe it just is adding on and on and on and on to a project. Now remember, projects have a clear-cut beginning and a clear end. If your customer starts taking a project to a point where it has no visible end in sight, this might be a great time for you to go back and revisit the original goals of your project. Say, I hear you that you want this. You know, why are you requesting this feature? Is it in line with the original goals? Is it something that we can do later? Don't be afraid to upsell. Don't be afraid to push things out into a phase 2. But try to keep online, and remember that a project is supposed to have a clear beginning and a clear end. And keep track of changes. In our company, we use a change order form. So if a customer requests something beyond the scope and we decide we can roll it into the original timeline for the project, or if a customer doesn't deliver on time and it's going to extend the project, we have them fill out a change order. This is, you know, a form then we have in writing with their signature on it, saying they approve the change for X cost or X delay in time, and they get a copy of it as well so that they know that their project's changed, and that gets then filed with their original proposal for reference later. And I said earlier, yeah, always offer your customers the ability to purchase more. I think that goes without saying. And the last step, okay, your project's complete. That's great. Follow up. Learn from what you did. Improve on your projects. Ask your customers how things went. How did you like our process? Did we get all of your goals? What could we have done better? What happened in this project that you didn't expect? Get feedback as much as you possibly can after every project so that you can change and modify and better your own business and yourself for future projects. After a website goes live is a great time to ask for a review if the customer's happy. Usually going back 3-4 months after you build a website, it's kind of tough because you're coming back to an old relationship. So when your relationship's strong, your customer's got a high from their website being live, it's a great time to say, hey, did you like working with us? Here's a direct link to our Google page. We'd love a review. So, any questions so far? No? All right. So kind of to wrap things all up, there are a lot of different tools that you can use to help your project stay on track, to help keep things running smoothly, to track timelines, to communicate with your customers, a lot of tools to assign different tasks to your team members, hit milestones, deadlines. These are some of the tools that we use or have used in the past, or that are common in the industry. Our team right now is using Slack primarily for communication. Even though we are a co-located office, it's really great to put everything in a Slack channel for our customers, because then we can go back and reference it. And it's, oftentimes developers will be working on 2 or 3 projects at once. And so if they can go back and revisit sort of the stream of communication through a Slack channel, it's great to kind of have that record rather than having to sort through and filter through email after email after email. So our project manager uses Slack to assign tasks to our developers, and our developers, use Slack to communicate with each other during the course of a project. We use Google Drive for almost everything, whether it's making spreadsheets for timelines or for storing documents for customers. You got pictures, here's a link to our Google Drive folder you can upload them to, sharing resources with customers. Pretty easy and free is the other benefit of Google Drive, up to a certain amount. Asana is great for task management. We use Asana for task lists, for sort of the everyday checklist. This is the process of going live. Update the DNS records, check the dev link, check image links, go through meticulously. And so Slack is kind of where we put most of our overall communication, and then direct over to Asana for sort of the more task management. A lot of companies use Basecamp as task management, project management. We used to use that in the past. Active Collab is another great project management, task management tool with a built-in calendar. It comes at a little bit higher of a price point, but pretty good for larger teams. Trello boards are really popular among the website development industry. And Process Street is similar to Asana. It's a software that I learned about a few months ago, and it's pretty cool because you can set up your entire process on Process Street, and this is great if you run a website development agency with a remote team. You can create an entire process and put checklists in it like you do for Asana. You can assign it to team members, but you get a quick overview of all of your projects and what % they're at and what stage they're in. So it's kind of, it's a paid program. They do have a free level, but it's kind of an alternative to Asana that a few colleagues of mine have really been enjoying. And so from here, go home, prevent scope creep, work with your customers, keep your customers happy. Do you have any questions?
All right, we have a mic runner in the back, so if you have a question, raise your hand and the mic's running towards you. So on the far end, on that side. Right behind you, right behind you. Yeah, let's make him run back and forth, it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so when you are asking developers to do more like client interaction and project management on their own, how do you manage their workload? Like, how many projects can they work on that way simultaneously if that's what you do?
So I think this answer is a little bit different for every company based on the types of websites or the type of projects that you're working on. When we were growing, we got to a point where our developers were comfortably able to handle maybe 5 or 6 projects at a time before we decided to hire a project manager. And so we ended up going down the route of actually hiring a full-time project manager to take that workload off of their plates. But Different project management methodologies will kind of have different ways to address that. The Scrum project management kind of allows developers to focus on one project at a time and then move on to the next, so they're not splitting their day up. I would recommend talking to each of your developers one-on-one to figure out what their comfort level is. I know, among our team, we have varying levels of how many projects different people want to work on. Some people are totally comfortable working on 6 different things at once. Other people really just prefer to work on one thing at a time. So if you can manage that, as the business owner and communicate with your customers, you're in our queue, but we have to finish however many projects before we get to there. Don't overload your developers, especially if they have to talk directly to the customers. Talking one-on-one to customers and developing websites can be a pretty big emotional strain. And if their forte isn't there, see what maybe you can do to take the workload off their plate. But, yeah.
I think you had a question as well, next to the mic runner already.
So I've been an agency owner for 7 years. Started with 0 customers. We're around about 200 now, so it's been a journey. Awesome. But out of 7 years building hundreds of sites, the biggest problem is content collection. Could you just maybe share overview or a 10,000-foot view? What's working for you guys? And I'll try to catch you up in the lounge. So I'd like to pick your brain a little bit on that.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so that's a big question. And that is one of our biggest struggles as well, is content collection. So we sell content, and that was our first solution, was to start selling content. And initially, I found a couple of contractors who were freelance content writers. And we just either direct referred to them for content writing, or we would sell it. For certain cases, we will recommend, sometimes even require, that the customer purchase content. We set up, as I mentioned, our project milestones. Content collection is always the first item. And if we set up a timeline and we need content collection by X date and you can't provide it by then, you need to fill out a change order form. At that point, maybe you have the negotiation there. Okay, well, either we can delay your timeline, that's a change order, or do you want to forego the change order? We'll, adjust the timeline, but you're going to buy content at this point. For individual developers, I strongly recommend that you find some freelance content writers to partner with, to network with. There are so many people in the industry, and receiving quality content makes all the difference in developing websites.
There was a question here in the front.
So I've got kind of a 2-part question for you. First off, a really helpful session. Thanks for doing this. So my first question is, as a team, and you've got a full-time project manager, what then is your role as the owner in the project management? Do you talk to clients directly? Does the project manager do that? What's your role in all of that? So that's the first part of the question.
So once you grow an agency, one of the other talks that I give a lot is growing from freelance to agency. And by the time you have a team of 9 like I do, your job is more managing people and managing workflow. Not so much managing workflow, but managing team and managing culture and running a business and paying the bills than it is talking with customers. So I speak with customers more in networking events as I run into them. I always meet and greet customers if they come into our office. I'll get introduced to them, but our project manager, our full-time project manager, is the person who has the contact with the customer. I stay involved with the projects, and I get updates, and I'll provide input, but project manager is the one kind of running the show. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
The other part of the question would be, how much do you let clients in on some of the tools that you shared? Like, I have Slack.
Yeah.
None of my clients use it. Do you let them in on that, or is that just internal?
We've never had no, we haven't ever. We have our content writer, one of our content writers that we network with, who's outside our company, in on our Slack channel, that we bring in quite a bit. But we've never brought a customer on, simply because most of the customers that we interact with don't have any idea what Slack is. They don't have any idea what Trello is. They don't know what Asana is. You can go ahead and invite your clients if you want, but I'm going to guess that they probably won't use it. But in terms of Google Docs, we do oftentimes share Google Docs, have shared folders with customers. And a lot of times customers will have their list of edits or changes or revisions on Google Docs. The nice thing about Google Docs is that it can be collaborative. And so we've got 3 different developers working off the same Google Doc for revisions. Well, they can all just strike out the stuff that they've done so that nobody's doing the same thing. And then also with the customer, so the customer can kind of see progress. Yep.
We have a question over there.
This is sort of a small detail, but I'm really trying to implement change orders, like a process for change orders. And I'm curious what you use specifically, because for the very reason that what you said is each client likes to communicate in a different way, and they don't all use the same platform. And my partner and I've kind of discussed like trying to establish, like, you have to log into this dashboard and fill in it, and they just won't do it. They'll still just call you on the phone or text you or do whatever that is. So how do you like formalize that? How do you get that together?
We have a page on our website for change orders with a form that they fill out, and we pre-populated form that they sign online, and they have to sign that. Yep. So get off the phone with them. You have a link in your email with a link, or a link in your email with the form. Yep.
Do you have daily meetings with your team, and do you do calls, or do you do once a week, or how do you manage and coordinate with your team of 9, and do you have individual, like how do you manage your time and the project managers and so forth?
So we are a team of 9 in a co-located space. We have an open office. We do utilize Slack for a lot of our communication. Right now we meet weekly to go over all of the projects. We meet every Tuesday, so that Monday is kind of a catch-up over the weekend day. And Tuesday is also a day when everybody's in the office. And so we sit down and we do about an hour-long meeting with teams. And then from there, it's primarily one-on-one communication, either between developer, project manager. And we will have impromptu meetings as needed if we need to talk about something important. Yeah. Over there.
I just wanted to ask, first of all, thank you, super helpful information. But you were talking about scope creep earlier, and as we try to prevent that, we try to make sure that everything that's in the scope, of course, is in the proposal. And then if I'm in a sales meeting, I want to make the sale right then and there before they get to make, change their mind overnight or, whatever it is. But a lot of times in that meeting, you discover other things that are needed. And so right now we use a Word document, do you have a software where you can bolt things on quickly right there in person and be able to give that anything like that? Or how do you handle that to be able to make the sale quickly?
So most of our projects are custom, and they get kind of more of a custom proposal. We frequently have sales come in with sort of a base project, and then at the project kickoff meeting, we found out that the customer wants more. Typically at that kickoff meeting, it's the customer, sales, and project manager. And so the project manager has already thoroughly reviewed the proposal, and she's really good at saying, hey, you're talking about this. I don't see that anywhere in here. Do you want to add that on? And, maybe that's not the appropriate time to talk about the cost because it's, the happy to get to know each other, yay, rah, rah, we're going to start the project meeting. But a great leave the meeting with, here's a bulleted list that I, put on a notepad or something for you that my sales guy is going to follow up with you and get you pricing on. And then you can decide if you need to do that now or if that can roll into a phase 2. So, yeah, does that help? Yes.
All right, we are going to our final question here in the front.
Hi, Jesse. You mentioned a couple times in your presentation about maybe instead of doing a change order, some features could go into a phase 2. Mm-hmm. And I've done that a couple times with a few different clients, but I've found it difficult to actually get the phase 2 to happen in the future because the momentum gets lost. Like once the big launch happens and they're basically happy with their website, it seems to kind of go on the back burner. And even if I try to follow up, it's like, oh yeah, we're still interested in that, but they're not like committed to making it happen. So is it better just to do change orders and make the project bigger as you're doing it, or do you have tips for how to make phase 2 happen better?
Right. So it kind of depends a little bit on the project. If implementing a change during the project is going to wildly change the project and take it off scope and maybe conflict with other projects that you have for other customers, then you need to make that internal decision. Is it okay for you to add it on during the project? If it's okay for you, then yeah, it's obviously going to affect the timeline. It's obviously going to affect the cost to just get in writing somewhere that you're doing that. If you have a change order form, maybe make part of that. This is going to extend the live date of your website by 3 weeks by adding this. So if that works for you and for your schedule, great. If not, then that follow-up time, I would suggest potentially even giving them a quote with the follow-up. Hey, thank you for your business. We're so glad the website's live. Leave us a review. And by the way, here's your quote for phase 2. It's valid for 30 days. And give them an endpoint for how long they have to make that decision. Ultimately, if you can give them a little bit of urgency and maybe 28 days later follow up and say, hey, that quote you have is going to expire in 2 days. Just FYI, if you want to hold that price, that might turn them back around and have them come in. Otherwise, if you have a salesperson, a great opportunity for the salesperson to follow up and, maybe set coffee, do a follow-up, and kind of reignite the fire. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Everyone, please put your hands together for Jessie. After a short break, we're going to continue here with a couple of lightning sessions. So don't leave the room, stay here. And again, please do scoot in to the middle of the rows because there's new people joining. So be nice, keep the chairs on the side free. having to skip over lap to lap. And while doing so, you're probably going to sit next to someone you don't already know. It's a perfect time to introduce yourself, make new friends, maybe find that next business partner. There's a lot of people, and I'm pretty sure that we don't have anyone here who knows everyone already. So meeting them is awesome. And we're going to start our lightning talk sessions in a minute or two. So please find yourself a seat. Make yourself comfortable. It's a slightly different format than the longer talks. We'll have a 10-minute presentation and then 5 minutes for questions while we set up the next speaker. So it's going to be super fast, short presentations. That means that if you want to ask a question after a lightning session, you have to be the first because there's not a lot of time. So maybe train your hands a bit already, that you can raise your hand so a mic runner can see you. Yeah, some exercise. Very good. I see some people who are training to ask questions. Yeah. So it's a 10-minute presentation and then just 5 minutes to ask questions, which usually comes down to 1 or 2 questions. So you really, really want to be the first. All right. If you're still standing and you're not planning on standing during the entire presentation, do find yourself a seat, because we're going to start with our next speaker of this afternoon. The first one in the lightning sessions, she started using WordPress on a personal blog, then to develop a website for a non-profit she volunteered with. Shortly after, she attended the second WordCamp Columbus in Ohio and heard the organizers were stepping down. They asked for someone to step up to lead it, so she did. She became the lead organizer for WordCamp Columbus and the local WordPress meetup. In the meantime, she's been part of the WordPress community for over 12 years. Today, she's the Director of Customer Success at Opt-in Monster and believes that if you start with the user's goals in mind, you'll win every time. Please give it up for the first Lightning Talk speaker, Angie Meeker.
Hello. All right, well, first, I also want to say thank you to Bluehost. They sponsored my trip here, and I know from being a WordCamp organizer that they are in it to win it with the WordPress community, and I want to say thank you to them. And I will share with you today 2 secrets to marketing your plugin or your piece of software, which for everyone here mostly is plugins, to the end users and not to developers, right? You're so close to the code, sometimes you just get in it so close that you can't see out how to get it to your users. And so I'm going to share 2 secrets with you. And typically the way that happens when a marketer starts telling developers what to do about this is they use this illustration of a drill. And I'm sure you've heard it before. You can even raise your hand if you've heard it before. I'm not going to stop telling it though, okay? So this is how it goes. It says, you're a developer, you built a drill. And you want to sell that drill now. So what you do is you start saying, I've got the best drill. It's the most lightweight drill. the sharpest bits in the world, and it's ergonomically fit to your hand, and on top of that, it's got a lifetime warranty. And that's how you move forward selling that drill. And you find out after a while that's not working very well. And the marketer says to the developer, that's because you shouldn't be selling the drill. You need to sell the hole. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I need to buy a drill. They say, I need a hole, right? See, nobody does that, right? Nobody does that. And that is very common advice to be told. Don't market the drill, market the hole, market the result of what your software does. But it's wrong. It's wrong advice. And I promise if you stick with me for the next 7, 8, 9 minutes, that I will show you why and what to do about it instead. So before we get into that, the very first secret that we're going to talk about in just a second is that the clicker's backwards. They already told me this too. There we go. It means nothing to be right if you're not helpful first. So like I said, before we get into what that means, before we unpack that, I want to know, does anyone want a Snickers bar? And someone's going to have to claim, oh, dang, he was quick. And I'm a good shot, too. Oh, my gosh, that was almost snagged. So, okay, did you know that Snickers bars and Mars bars have basically the same ingredients, right? They're chocolate, they're nougat, and they're caramel. The only difference is that Snickers have what? Peanuts, that's right. Well, when the Mars company first introduced Snickers, they had a really hard time helping the consumer differentiate between the two, because the way that they marketed it was to say, Snickers has peanuts. Like that's some big, huge news. Snickers has peanuts. And they tried to get people to understand that Snickers and Mars bars are different products altogether, and that you should choose Snickers. And that went on for a long time. Sales were kind of flat until they said, you know what, let's actually talk to our people who are buying Snickers and find out why they bought it in the first place. So they did that, and what they found out was that the inclusion of the peanuts for buyers of Snickers turned it from a treat, a confection, which the Mars bar was, into a whole new category for buyers. It turned it into a food product. They were reaching for Snickers when they were hungry, when they needed to satisfy their hunger, not when they wanted a treat, not when they wanted a snack. Well, as the Mars company began to really understand that, what people wanted a Snickers bar for, they repositioned the marketing of it, and that's when they came up with the slogan, Snickers satisfies. And you can see that's even through to today, a lot of their marketing still revolves around Snickers satisfies. So what did they do? What they did, the way they made that shift was to stop selling what the customer needed, which was a candy bar with peanuts, and instead started selling what they wanted. Now here's another example, kind of more within our industry. So Liquid Web, a hosting company here in the WordPress community, has a WooCommerce specific hosting. Now there's a guy that works at Liquid Web named Chris Lemma, and when he presents WooCommerce's hosting, one of their primary features is their powerful caching that's already set up in their WooCommerce hosting. But he doesn't go out and say, hey, all you e-commerce store owners, you need caching. And he doesn't even go out and say, you need a fast website, you need a fast store. Instead, he comes one further and he says, you need to make more sales. And the way to make more sales in e-commerce is to have a fast website, because the slower websites have higher bounce rates and they rank lower in search. So if you want more sales, that's what the customer wants, then you need a fast website. And we need to sell you caching in order to get that. And so that plugin developer, which I know it's not plugin, software, let's work with me here. You move from just selling the software to selling what the software does to selling what the customer wants in the first place. And that's a big shift. And I know this because I've been around long enough to see plugin marketing sites. Like I know that the majority of plugin marketing sites in the WordPress community are selling either the software itself, and then if they go one better, then they're trying to sell what it does. And almost none of you, I say this with great love, I want you to win. Almost none of you are selling what the customer wants in the first place. The second secret is not that. The second secret is that no matter who you're helping, no matter who you're helping. So you built this plugin, and it might have been the very best plugin in the market. It might have had like the milkiest, work with me here, the milkiest chocolate, right? The creamiest nougat, the freshest peanuts. You might be right in saying that your plugin is the best, but if you can't help your customers learn how to translate that into what's helpful for them, you will not see sales go the way that you want them to go. And then one step further than that, the next secret is that no matter what that is that you're helping them with, it always, always tracks back to the individual person. So when marketers talk to developers, a lot of times they say, okay, the next thing you need to do is you need to go out and build your customer avatars. And you need to build these like theoretical profiles of who's buying your product. And I say, who the crap has time for fake customers, right? Like, you don't have time, right? I mean, who has time for that? Instead, you got to actually talk to your customer. You have to actually speak to your customers and find out some information. And here's an example of how that works itself out into the marketing of your software, or maybe you're even a theme designer here, or an agency. This really, it applies to you too. 2 minutes? Woo, okay, let's go. All right, so we worked with a law firm, and the law firm said that they wanted their marketing site to be like in your face. We're gonna crush the competition, we're gonna get your loved one out of jail. And it was directed to the criminal, right? So, but what we found out as we worked with them, that it wasn't the criminal who ever purchased from them. It was the criminal's wealthy, well-to-do, well-put-together aunt, or some other family member that the family considered to have their crap together. And that person would be contacted by the family and told, can you go talk with the lawyers for us? Can you go find out what's gonna happen next? Well, that person has a very different want than this person, than the criminal. This person wants to be able to come back to their family and continue that appearance of having their stuff together, of being the one who always has the right answer. And you can see that that sales funnel that reaches that rich aunt is very different than the sales funnel that would reach a criminal, right? And they would have moved forward happily with their marketing to the criminal if we hadn't stopped to say, whoa, whoa, wait a minute. Let's talk to your people. What do they actually want? What are they here for? So how do you do that? You have to get on the phone with your customer. And I mean, you get on the phone with your customer. You talk to them face to face, voice to voice. You don't rely on analytics because that can't tell you intent. And you don't rely on heat maps, again, because that doesn't tell you intent. And you don't rely on just what's coming through your support tickets because that doesn't tell you anything about what they wanted you for in the first place. So instead, you get on the phone and you say, why did you choose us? What problems were you having at the time that you were looking for a solution? Did we help you solve that problem? What other problems are you having that we might be able to help you solve as well? And when you start to put these things together, that's when the sweet stuff happens for your customers, and even begins to reveal new features that you need to build. Instead of you just sitting and thinking of features that might be helpful, when you actually get on the phone with your customer or take a video with them and say, hey, can I just talk to you for a little bit about this product and how we might help you? Magic begins to happen. So that person with the drill, they didn't want the drill, right? They didn't wake up and say, I want the drill. And nobody says, I want a hole, because nobody says, I want a 1/4 inch absence of wood or metal, right? Nobody says that. What they wanted, and the reason your drill never sold, was that they wanted a bookcase to put their gardening books on, and they need the hole to put the shelf there, and that's why they need the drill. Or they want to keep their mother safe in the bathroom when she gets out, and they need the hole to hang the grab bar, and that's what they need the drill for. So here's what I want you to remember. All of this boils down to this. You have to sell your customers what they want, and then deliver what they need. What you build delivers this thing that they wanted. That's all. Angie Meeker, thank you.
All right, so we have time for 1 or 2 questions. So who's first? Yes, right behind you is the mic runner. On his way. Yeah, in front of you. Yeah, sorry. A mic runner brings the mic so that everyone can hear the question.
Okay, for sure. So what if your plugin is for, developers who are implementing it for clients, but then also the client could also be the person purchasing it? Where do you where do you split the marketing copy between the two?
So I think even in that case, you're looking at your developer as the customer in that case and saying, what does the developer want this for? Instead, because even developer to developer, it's still really easy to just say, I'm gonna sell you the whole, because you should know, developer, what this does. But that's not how marketing works. Marketing does not work on wholes. It works on emotion. It works on, what do I need? What's my goal? And it's just really easy for developers to just say, okay, now I'm talking to another developer, so I don't need to actually market this. I can just present what it does, and they'll understand and magically purchase. And when you have two segments like that, it's okay. It is okay to have two different audiences. Most of us have that. Most people in WordPress, we have those two audiences. One a developer, one is the end user. And it's okay to market to both of them, but you still have to market to the developer. It's not like you get to just cast them away and say, oh, you're a developer, so I'm not going to market to you. I'm not going to speak to what you want. I guess so the advice doesn't change. Excuse me. It's the same.
All right. Do we have a last question? Yes, we
Don't run
do.
away.
Over there.
Excuse me.
It's actually almost as much as a comment as a question, but one of the things that I found really successful for getting a hold of your users and talking to them, if you can get their email address, I send an automated email that says, hey, I'm David, I'm the CEO, and in one sentence, could you just tell me why you signed up? And that's it. I get a ton of responses from that, and oftentimes way more than one sentence, and those lead to a lot of great conversations. So it's another idea to, I think it's super important to get a hold of your users. It's another idea to do that.
So my addition to that is a great part of your onboarding sequence for new customers, but take it one step further and say, hey, I'm the president. Can I hop on the phone with you for a minute? There is something magic that happens when you actually speak to your customers, because that's a conversation, but it's not really two-way. It really is just the customer talking at him. And he can reply, and that's okay, but it's very different when you're actually speaking to your customers and developers. A lot of us in our community are scared. We're just scared to get on the phone with customers, and it can be really scary, honestly. You're like afraid they're going to say something really terrible and awful about your software, and they're not. They're going to tell you how much they love it and what they bought it for.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We are continuing with the second speaker of these lightning sessions. And that is the owner of 6.4 Web Design and Marketing, which focuses on meeting the unique marketing needs of small businesses and non-profit organizations. He got involved with WordPress while building his very first website for his business, because he couldn't afford to do so for someone else to do it at the time. Besides his daily work as a marketing consultant and designer, he likes to serve as a mentor at the Small Business Center at Forsyth Technical Community College, and is an active volunteer for several community non-profit organizations. In the free time that's left, he also loves cooking and singing at church. Be prepared for an inspiring talk and some valuable pro tips about how to level your network skills, and join me in welcoming on stage Ray Mitchell.
I really don't know whether that woo was deserved, but I'll take it. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Taco said, I'm Ray Mitchell. I founded 6.4 Web Design and Marketing, made for you, and I am that angry-looking black guy up there. I am an angry guy until you actually get to know me, right? So why this talk? It's a very practical thing, but I've learned to go to WordCamps. I really enjoy dealing with the WordPress community. Meet a lot of great people, and at the end of the conversation, I go, well, can I have your business card? I don't have a business card. We in the WordPress community really don't do a good job of promoting ourselves, even among ourselves. A lot of times we don't do a good job of promoting ourselves with the people who could actually hire us and give us work and actual money that we could use to eat and get a beer belly and all that other good stuff, right? So this talk is about that. Let's get comfortable with networking. I was not comfortable networking. I had a business before I started doing design-related stuff, and I did not have a high opinion of networking. Networking is really for people who like to schmooze and slackers who don't like to go to their jobs. You don't really do that unless you really have to. And I started this business. I had no clients, so I had to, right? So I was fortunate to join the Chamber of Commerce, and I met some people who said, hey, you should come to these networking events and go out. But I really did not see a lot of value in it. I just started this new business. I had this fancy new website that I built myself. I was tweaking it and stuff. I was doing some consulting work. I had training materials and all sorts of survey instruments. And this guy kept saying, Ray, you got to go out to the networking meetings. Ray, let's go to this leads group. Ray, we got to do this. Chris, I'm working. I got this stuff going. I'm working. Chris said to me one simple thing that changed my perspective. Raymond, networking is the work. How many customers do you have today, Ray, while you're so busy working? No, I don't have any. Networking is the work, because that's the way we go out and meet people. That's the way we tell people what our services are, and that's the way we get customers. So very quickly, I learned to like networking. It was good. I got customers, and you meet people, and you meet interesting people when you get outside of your office, get outside of the cubicle and go out and interact. So isn't networking just about exchanging business cards? Why do you need to network? It's good because it allows you to talk about yourself. We just heard in the last presentation, you need to speak to your customers. One way of doing that is getting out where people are and speaking to the customers. In person, face-to-face, hand-to-hand, knee-to-knee, sometimes at a table, and really doing that. And you can do that while you're networking. There are a lot of places and a lot of opportunities to go out, but networking needs to have a purpose, right? Someone smarter than me gave me these 3 objectives for networking, and I think it's important. There's 3 things. You can build a relationship when you're networking, you can build your knowledge, or you can work to build your bank balance, all by going to networking meetings, right? If you think about WordPress and WordCamp, this is a great opportunity to knock all 3 up at the same time. We build relationships. There are people I see once a year, and when I see them at WordCamp again, we smile, and it's great. That's a relationship you've built. Definitely you have the ability to build your knowledge by coming to a networking event like this. And if you meet the right partner, if you get that one right idea, you will build your bank balance. So it's important to get out and network. So in terms of networking, where do you go to network? It says where do you go to network, but very quickly I cut through it and put a strike through it. It's where do you go to build relationships, right? Because the whole purpose is if you build a relationship and you have that relationship, somebody's going to refer you because of that relationship. Someone's going to do business with you because you seem like a person of great integrity, a fun person to be around. Because they have that relationship, they're willing to do business with you or give you business. So build a relationship. Don't focus on the networking. So you can go to networking events. You can go to the Chamber of Commerce because they're sure to have lead meetings. In the Uber with the Uber driver, because you always get to talk with them about what they do when they're not driving, and they learn a little bit about what you're doing. Conferences like this one, association meetings, in line at the supermarket, at your kid's soccer game. There's always someone to talk to. You don't always have to talk about your business first, but you should talk to them. All right, so part of that talk is to have a good elevator pitch, right? The elevator pitch, or that 30-second commercial, is the way that you talk about your business in a way to get somebody to know you pretty well. So I give a fancy little introduction, but really what I do is I'm Ray Mitchell, and I help small businesses actually grow using online content, as opposed to saying I'm a web designer, or I'm the webmaster, because everybody knows what the webmaster is. Everybody knows what a web designer is. But people want to know how they can make their business grow. And that's the difference. You kind of want to leave them with that idea of, getting to say, well, how do you do that? And that's where you get to begin to build that relationship, because you're answering a question. They can learn a little bit more how you satisfy the needs of your customer. All right? So, first pro tip for the afternoon. The person who says, so what do you do? The person who says that first is the one that wins. Well, what do you mean? Well, if you say, what do you do first, you hear what they need, what they're interested in. So if you've asked them and they had an opportunity to talk, they turn it around and ask what you do. And this is the time to couch or position your 30-second commercial to satisfy their need, to talk to them in a way how you solve their problem. You can actually tailor your response to the things that they need most. Well, Ray, I don't really like to talk. I don't know what to talk when I get with people. So I'll solve that problem for you. Forward them. Forward. Right? Easy conversation starters. You don't have to use all of them at the same time, but these are a couple of things you can rely on in order to have a good conversation. You can ask them a question about their family. You can ask them about their occupation. So what do you do? You can ask them what they like to do for fun. You can ask them about their dreams. You know, I like to travel. What do you like to do? Their desires. What do you like? And that's one way to start a conversation. It's not necessarily a conversation for conversation's sake. It's about building a relationship, right? The second pro tip is assume that you're going to see them again. You don't have to get everything out of them in that interaction. You don't really have to focus on doing your sales pitch right then. Sometimes it's good enough to get the person's name and talk to them for a little bit and assume that you're going to see them again. Because the worst thing is going to be is you're seen as that sales guy who just wants to press. They won't want to talk to you anymore, right? The other thing you don't want to do, we talked about forward, don't burp, right? When you meet somebody for the first time, stay away from bad jokes. Don't talk about your uncomfortable childhood experiences, right? Don't get engaged in conversations about religion and politics. That brands you sometimes in an unfavorable way, right? And networking, you may think it's about you and your business and getting the things that you want, but it's really not about you, right? Like the song says, you probably think it's about you. It's not really about you. It's about what you can do for other people. Because if you're seen as being a problem solver, a helper, a solutions giver, people will like you and they'll remember that. And they'll want to return the favor. And that favor may be getting you some business. So it's good to be with people and help people first. And that will help you. Lastly, follow-up is everything. Once you meet with somebody, make plans to contact and connect. You know, connect with them on LinkedIn. Say, hey, when we get back to town, I didn't know you were going to WordCamp, but since you're right in the same city where I am, let's get together afterward. Build that relationship and continue to work on it. If you do these things, you'll find yourself very quickly getting comfortable with networking with other people and very comfortable in building relationships that serve your business. So I'll ask the question I ask at every WordCamp. Do you have a business card? Thank you.
Again, we have a couple of minutes for questions, so who's first? I can't see all of you at the same time. So, oh, right here in front. Yeah. Yeah, for me it's looking like a tennis match. Who's going to be?
I noticed that you said that a lot of times it's not the best for a salesperson to push. And a lot of times when you're asking for sales advice, you get kind of the opposite advice where they say the impulse is the most important thing, get them to buy on impulse. So what do you have to say about that? Do you think that maybe in this field it's not as good, or that the relationship's more important?
Relationships are always important. You can press for sales, but it just depends on the environment. If the customer is looking to you for information, if they've approached you first and they kind of know what you do, that's probably you're already a good ways down the funnel if they're already approaching you and ready to have that kind of discussion. But in a casual circumstance, a lot of people, when you're meeting them for the first time in a networking event, you're meeting them on the road or in a conference, they don't know who you are, they don't know your reliability, they don't know your product. It's going to be hard for you to sell and close a sale on that interaction. So better to build the ability to send them some more information or talk to them again or invite them out for coffee. Why don't you invite me into your shop and let me see what you do? That's a better way of building a relationship that will lead to a sale.
Another question over here.
Thank you very much. What do you recommend for handing out business cards? I don't love to carry business cards with me myself. I go as myself as a person like that. But sometimes that you need to share some contact details. What do you recommend to hand out, like a digital business card? Do you have something set up?
I would say have a business card. It doesn't have to have everything you do, but it should have your phone number and email. Even if you trade under your own name, Ray Mitchell will have a business card, email, and phone number. Because somebody's want to get in touch with you, and they may not have a pen, and they may be somebody who you really want to get in touch with. I heard somebody talking about the electronic ways that maybe Instagram use and things like that. You're not going to make a connection with my father, and you're not going to make a connection with me trying to send me something electronic. But you give me a piece of paper, I'll have it. If I want it electronic, I can take my phone out and take a picture of it. But don't rely on that as the only means of being able to make a connection. Business cards have lasted for hundreds of years because they work.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have time for a final question over here.
Thanks, Ray. When I come to these, I get a stack of business cards at the end, thankfully. What's the best thing to do with this big stack of cards that I have at the end besides connect with them on LinkedIn?
If they're well designed, you can actually call. Hey, we met at WordCamp. I'm the guy with the red flannel shirt. We talked. And you start the conversation. You forward them. You know, tell me a little bit more about your services. Tell me a way that we might be able to partner. I can help you. They may never call you back. They may not even be willing to take your call, but some will, and you'll build a relationship that way. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, for our last lightning talk speaker for today, you've traveled quite a bit, coming here from Tokyo, Japan. He's been a user and a contributor of WordPress for more than a decade. He helped organize several WordCamps, including as a lead organizer, Tokyo, in 2011. He also co-organized the WordPress Tokyo meetup, spoke at a few events, contributed to Japanese translations of local packages and documents, and to WP Core. He is currently a junior webmaster at Temple University, the Japan campus, doing anything web-related from in-house development to contents editing to server management and a lot more. In the summer of 2018, he co-taught a class to undergraduate art students. And in his free time, he likes taking photographs and watching football. Please welcome on stage, with a very warm applause, Toru Miki.
Okay. Can you hear me? It's good. Thank you for the nice introduction. So I'm going to give this short talk, a non-technical talk, about my experience teaching university students about self-publishing and trying to reflect that to be in terms of contributing to WordPress and trying to reflect that into the meaning of the democratized publishing. My introduction was already said, so I'm going to skip most of this. But just a note is that I haven't had a career to be a teacher. I had no intention to be a teacher. Always had an interest in education. That I work at the university. So I'm actually a staff. And how did I go to teach? Well, this is a photo from WordCamp Tokyo 2017. I was involved as and I was the organizer, and I'm here doing emceeing at English-speaking session tracks. Yes, we have that kind of track. And a guy at the bottom left-hand corner with straw hat happened to be someone that I know, Shinya Watanabe, who's art professor at Temple University Japan campus. We know each other for maybe 6-7 years, but he knew nothing that I'm so involved with WordPress and my expertise level of WordPress. At the end of all of this, he asked me, would you be interested in teaching? There's an art class which involves WordPress. I thought, really? There isn't such a class? I said, yeah, and well, after a few discussions and some paperwork and things, I got an offer to co-teach with him in summer, for the semester of summer 2018, a class called Internet Imaging. And a course number starts with art, so you can say that's an art course. The first paragraph is a quote, straight quote from syllabus, and it's written in very academic way, so I'm not gonna read it out. But basically, what it means is students will learn what and how online self-publication is done. The main scope of this is because they are students is to promote their artwork, so i.e. portfolio. But we wanted them to think beyond that, just being beyond just being a portfolio. And we don't expect them to be a developer. We don't going to teach to that level, but we wanted them to learn and have a, even have a grasp and idea of the technical aspects of things, particularly related to images, like even simple stuff like you put up high quality images, looks beautiful, but it's going to take years to load the page and that kind of stuff. And I'm going to share 4 of my experiences first. One, and this is more of my, come from my inexperiences with teaching students, the younger generation particularly, because I had a conception that, they'll be, they grew up in the age of all this internet and the web devices, everything, and they'll be comfortable with the web. Yes, they were. They'll probably do fine with running maybe HTML, CSS, semantics to the really the basic fundamental level. And they were okay. But CSS layout, they'll find it very difficult. But then most of the people do, right? It's pretty confusing. They're reasonably aware of security risks. I mean that by, I say to them 20 times, don't use the same password for everything. And they know what that means. They're pretty fine to understand what it means. Or more like they use it for many passwords and they kind of got lost which password they were which. But they found the programming to be difficult. And this is a level, one of the tasks for them was to make a child theme. So this is those 1 line or the 3 lines of PHP code you have to write in the child theme to load the parent theme's style sheet. Some people were very confused, even with just that. So it reminded me that programming is another couple step above of writing just basic HTML, CSS. Pretty obvious to maybe those who teaches. Second point, customers is great. There was one class that I went through some option setting and I was going to go through some customizer setting and stuff, but ran out of time. And I asked them to have a look at themselves so I can go over the details in the next class. Come next class, I didn't need to go any details because they found it was very easy to use, intuitive. They found everything and terminology like widget, which in my experience, you had to explain to people, for example, it was in meetups, what the widget mean. But one of the students said it's pretty much self-explanatory. It's fine. If you're a veteran developer, community person, you go to the meetups and WordCamps and you talk to everyone, and so we call the community. You ask about customizers and how they use them, and they say, oh, the customizer, no, I don't want to use customizer. Or we only use it for the first time, when we install the site, so we don't really spend time on it. But then I think it kind of reminds me it's often overlooked how helpful this feature is. Now, we didn't really have time to go through Gutenberg in our semester, but I just have to make a quick quote from David Bissett, who I believe gave a talk called Gutenberg and Use at WordCamp, recent WordCamp, I'm not quite sure. Basically, similar conclusion here, saying that these younger ones tend to favor Gutenberg in a positive light. And I just thought that's very similar to my finding with customizer and newer generations. And in the light of the 5.0 is now out, it'll be interesting to see what this new generation really finds, this user interface. The third point, university is internationally diverse. This depends on which university it is that you look at it, I think. But I had some students in my class. Amongst them, they can communicate in 5 or more languages, which is pretty impressive, I think. And there just happened to be a translation contribution day at local WordPress meetup, that's Meetup Tokyo. And we advised them to have we didn't make them, but we advised them to have come and join, see how things are working, what we do and stuff. Some of them did, 6 of them did actually. And it's very interesting because she's teaching her about the codecs and how to translate with the polyglot on the interface. And then you get a question like, can I translate from Japanese to Taiwanese and then Taiwanese to Japanese? But at the moment, you can only translate from English to Japanese or the English to Taiwanese. That kind of perspective never really occurred to me. And even I've been around for 10 years. If that can be possible, then maybe more people could join to translate, perhaps, maybe. Also, we talked to a Japanese professor. She said they're always looking for opportunities for students, students to put their language skill that they learned into practice. And now, a translation like this could really be perhaps is something that they could work on. Sorry. So my thought from here is that if you want to do this kind of translation contribution day at local meetup, have a look at your local universities. It might be quite internationally diverse. Last point is inspire them, inspiration. So we had 4 guest lecturers in our class, and WordPress community has many life-changing personal stories. Your e-commerce site went up by 10%, or your company site went up by, access went up by 120% or something. Yes, that's great too. But you have personal stories like how self-publishing and perhaps your activity in the community have changed their lives, have changed their careers. And also, for example, Fumiki, who's on this photo here, is actually a core contributor, and he's a developer. But he always wanted to be a novelist. So outside his work, uses things like WordPress to publish his own literature work. And he always think about how he can monetize all this, and trying to think about how one click you can make it Amazon Kindle and sell it and whatever. That kind of story, students were really, really interested in that kind of story. How to monetize things, to earn things, to get extra earning perhaps, and how that can help with their careers. Because these students were going to graduate in maybe a year or 2 years' time, and they start thinking about what to do next with their careers. And so, like technical aspect is fine too, but like how that can tie up with your near future career and life, I think they were very, very interested in this. And there are a lot of questions that were asked. And they asked it in Japanese, which I was very, very surprised that they could all communicate in Japanese very well. And I had no Japanese students in the class too. So finally, I would like to somehow reflect that in terms of contribution. In a way, because I've been thinking about what does the meaning of the democratized publishing mean for about this around the year. Just my personal thinking, really. We were going to use WordPress from right from the beginning, but we did ask ourselves hard, is it really the suitable choice of publishing platform to teach online self-publishing? Because nowadays there's so many different tools, apps, open source, proprietary, different technologies. So many choices there for that student might find easy to use or better to use. And then there's like mobile phone devices that changed everything, the way you interact with your life with the internet, take away the barriers of time and places. So, I mean, I only did this for semester, so I can't really say, yes, that was the right choice. But then both senior, the core teacher, and I agree that I think it was a quite suitable choice. I'm not only saying that because I'm speaking at WordCamp, but really, I tend to think WordPress is like a crossroads of different web technology and cultures. So you can start with WordPress, but you can go into different areas. You can learn about front-end development, back-end development, software development, not only technical stuff, but like marketing, writing, editing, and also internet culture as well, because of how, because of the maturity of this WordPress community. And you can also learn about how to do online collaboration internationally to make something on the web. And so we think it was, I think it was a quite good choice to use WordPress. And I would like to somehow reflect that in terms of democratized publishing. Is something that one interpretation that I kind of came up with is this: if use of WordPress has a role in education for students to be introduced, study, and to get inspired about self-publishing, then isn't this democratized publishing? And that's regardless of whether students continue to keep using WordPress or not. A couple of years later, they might find that different tools are better suited for life, or they might find that the self-publishing isn't really their cup of their tea, you know. But it's okay. It's something, web and interaction with web and self-publishing is something that younger one will be exposed in their life, in future life. So if WordPress has some kind of role in introducing them about that, and I do feel that's pretty good in itself. And that's my conclusion. Thank you very much.
So we do have time for one question, and one question only. I see in the back someone jump up, so you're the lucky question asker today.
Hello, thank you. Do you have any plans to recreate the course in an online environment?
An online environment?
Online course?
No, not at the moment. I'm actually scheduled to co-teach this again in next year's summer semester. Reason why I'm not doing this semester, next semester is all to do with like administration of the university stuff is detailed. But yeah, no, not the online stuff. No, I'm not quite sure whether the main campus, the Temple University, offers any of it, but I'm not. No plan.
All right, thank you very much. One more big applause for Toru.
Thank you. Also, can I just say one thing?
Yes, you can.
So if anyone's interested to come to like Japan World Camp next year, or I don't know if anyone's planning at the moment, to be honest, but get connected, and I hope you can come to Japan one day.
Ray just taught us how to do that, so go talk to him. Quick reminder, if you are going, when you are going to the after party tonight, bring your badge. There are no +1s allowed, so if you want to bring your better half, make sure that he or she has a badge of their own. If they don't yet, go to registration and make it happen, because they're going to be really strict, and only with a badge you will be allowed entrance. So we have a 15-minute break now, and we'll be back here for more amazing sessions. So, before anything, I was asked to say this with a straight face. It's kind of hard for me, but no, it's a serious topic. WordCamp US is a nut-free conference. Not talking about people like me, talking about the peanuts, the almonds, the pecans, anything. We have people with a severe airborne nut allergy. That means that even if you had something that contains nuts, outside of the venue you come in, that could be bad enough for them to be affected. So if you touched anything with nuts, if you ate nuts, please do wash your hands, wash your face, because it's a real problem. So don't bring any nuts, don't bring any candy bars with nuts. It's of vital importance, literally, for someone. So, people are still coming in, so if you're sitting on the outside of a row, please move to the center, because that allows people coming in late to also find a seat without going lap to lap to the center of the row. That'd be nice. It will also give you a chance to meet new people. And then we're going to start in 1 minute. So now's the time to move over. Make sure you're not on the outside of your row, but scoot in a bit. I don't do jokes, you know that. So there's a lot of requests for me to talk about nothing. I'm not, because I'm not here on stage to be the speaker. I'm here to announce our next speaker for today. So the next speaker got involved with WordPress in art school, where her teacher encouraged her to learn WordPress and to freelance. Today, she's a passionate web designer and developer. She loves CSS, she loves WordPress, and she loves her new job at Penske Media Corporation as a senior design operations engineer. In her free time, she likes writing on her blog, working on art projects, and more specifically, monster illustrations, reading, eating at good restaurants, and getting exercise outside. She's very excited to present a topic that takes up the majority of her waking brain power: bridging the design to development gap with CSS algorithms. CSS algorithms? What are those? Well, you're going to find out. So please put your hands together for our next speaker, Laura Schenk.
Okay, hi everyone. This is very exciting. WordCamp US. All right. Make sure my slides are up. Not quite yet. Yeah. Oh, yay. Okay, bridging the design and development gap with CSS algorithms. Okay, what's this going to be about? All right, so this talk is also known as an equally confusing title, The Algorithms of CSS. So I've been giving this talk for about 6 months now, and slightly versioning it every time I do it. And so this is a big evolution, another big release, this conference, version 2.0 of my talk. Very exciting. Okay, so I want to kind of start with my background here. So CSS has always been something that comes really naturally to me. So like in my wonderful introduction, I have an art background, and CSS was something I could, visually see immediately. So when I wrote code, I saw an immediate result. And computer science is something I did not really encounter for, 6 years of being a web developer, until I literally and specifically encountered the concepts in computer science by way of needing to study for an algorithms interview, which is a very interesting phenomenon in our industry. So I kind of proposed this talk, The Algorithms of CSS, as a way of bridging the gap between these two seemingly disparate topics. So there's a nice bridge. And throughout the course of researching and writing this talk for the first time, CSS went from something I was like, okay, I'm writing CSS, like this is sometimes annoying, sometimes it's fun, but it's really like, oh, okay, I just got to do it. And I was learning all this algorithm stuff at the time, and I was like, this is really cool, like, oh, CSS, like you're not getting there for me. And through the course of this research, CSS went from kind of like this to like, wow, oh my God, CSS is a miracle. Like, why can't everything be like CSS? So the bridge between these two things and kind of the two sides of this metaphor, so to speak, aren't really CSS and computer science, because CSS is very much part of computer science, but it's more like this. So we have these like departments and different disciplines, so like design and products maybe on one side and engineering's on the other side. We're trying to communicate between these two different departments. Or the structure might be kind of like this too. So maybe everything's a little bit different. And according to the title of this talk, these bridges are comprised of CSS algorithms? Okay. All right, let's get to it. So, first question. Is CSS a programming language? And followed that up with a nice hand-drawn fire emoji. So has anybody thought about this before? Maybe it's a little bit like, I don't know, interesting. So I posed this question on the best source for gathering data, of course, Twitter. Okay, so this was in March of 2018. I wrote this question, and here are my responses. So 50% no, 42% yes, 8% I'm not sure. A whopping 129 votes in my data set here, so let's keep that in mind. But the responses to this question were really interesting, because some people were like, yes, of course it's a programming language, like absolutely, why is this even a question? Yes. And the other responses were like, no, you can't call CSS programming. Like, no, it's not a programming language. And so I was kind of like, let's stop for a second here and consider maybe there are some opinions being mixed up in this, or like, what's going on? This is kind of like politics at this point. So I kind of took a step back and I was like, what is a programming language? So let's talk about this question first. And there's a lot of research about this. There's entire fields of study devoted to figuring out what a programming language is and putting a definition to this. And a lot of the definitions boil down to a language of formal instructions for a computer. So that's from Wikipedia and others. But the point here is like, it's such a broad topic of study. We can't really have a very narrow definition for what comprises programming. So we would soon find programming paradigms in this field of study. And there are two main programming paradigms. So we have imperative, which is the how of programming, and declarative, which is what. So these two paradigms are ways of describing styles of programming, but they're also describing certain features in languages, so how a programming language operates. And an imperative programming language is telling a computer how to do something. So you have the presence of what's called control flow, where you are telling the computer how exactly to walk through a set of statements, and you're jumping around a program based on a specific order. And declarative programming languages do not have control flow. So all of that logic, all of that control structure is baked into the statements themselves. What are some imperative programming languages? Well, this is what we would usually think of when we think of programming languages. So we have JavaScript, Ruby, C++, Python. Anything you might immediately think of as a programming language is probably an imperative programming language. Declarative, on the other hand, these are oftentimes domain-specific. So they are built to function within a certain context, within a certain domain, because all of that logic has to be baked into the language itself. So we can't necessarily dictate at the type of granular level that you can in an imperative language. SQL is a domain-specific declarative programming language for databases. You might know it's coming here. HTML. Sure, yes. That is a domain-specific declarative programming language if you're using this broad definition. And CSS, of course, falls under this category. So, boom. CSS is a domain-specific declarative programming language. 100%. Also, in 2018, CSS plus HTML are Turing complete. And so turn complete refers to the ability to solve a problem of a certain complexity. CSS also has math. CSS also has functions and variables. CSS also has conditional logic via kind of the cascade and media queries. You can absolutely have conditional logic there. So I want to talk about a specific conference talk by someone named Felina, who's a computer science researcher in the Netherlands. And she gives this amazing talk called What is Programming Anyway? And she goes through her story of researching domain-specific languages in finance to realizing that, oh, they already have programming languages. Like spreadsheets are programming. And kind of getting the response from the community that's like, that's not real programming. Except one of the core tenets of programming is that anybody can learn it, so anybody can be a programmer. And when we have these really strong ties to math and logic and to the metaphor of engineering for programming, we're actually excluding a lot of people. And I would consider myself among that. I kind of ended up being a programmer and like being a web developer. But my background was in art. If I thought programming was all math, there's no way I would have gotten into coding. So we can kind of explore other metaphors for what programming is. So programming has writing. So I highly recommend watching this talk of Felina's. It's excellent. So to put a little visualization to this, programming is a nice green pasture, and all of the programming languages are little pools in this wonderful pasture. This can also be computer science, except computer science is a lot bigger than this. So computer science is a lot more than programming languages. So when we draw these like really distinctive lines, it can be harmful. So I posed this question again in November of 2018. I wonder if the results have changed. No. They have not. I did get many more votes in my data set, though. This one has 1,376 votes. However, I will point out, this is a comparison of the two charts. The I'm not sure bar has jumped up a little bit. And I think the real answer to this question is like, I'm not sure. So I'd love to see like that be the most, not necessarily yes or no, but it's like, oh, we maybe have to like think a little bit more about what this question's asking. Okay, so now we're going into a sub-talk. This is a talk within a talk. Browser internals in less than 5 minutes. I have a lot of people in the room, and this is important stuff. High level from not an expert. All right, here's me sitting at my computer, obviously. On the other side, we have a server, obviously. So when I'm at the computer, I'm typing things into the browser, into the URL bar, and I say, hey, server, give me data. And the server says, OK, here's data. So if we look at some vocabulary for this process, the client would be the browser. And we have an HTTP request, which is the request for my data. And the server is giving me back a byte stream. So that byte stream is given to the browser. Here is said byte stream in hexadecimal Unicode points is the term. So this is data. This is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in a much in a decoded format. And when the browser receives these code points, they're called, it turns them into tokens. So it parses them and turns them into little figures out kind of which meaningful groups of tokens there are, and then assigns those to two trees. So the DOM tree, which we're probably familiar with, document object model, that's where HTML goes. And information about CSS is going to go into the CSS OM, so the CSS object model. How many of you had heard of a CSS OM before? Okay, so not many. It's a thing. The CSS OM, that's where all our CSS is. And those two trees, I kind of think of them getting married and having a baby, even though that's not really how it works. But they result in the render/rule tree. And this is very specific styling information for every single DOM element. It's essentially a set of instructions for laying out a web page. Also worth noting, when you hear the term render blocking JavaScript, that refers to when JavaScript is in this set of tokens and when it's parsed and turned into tokens, as soon as the browser hits JavaScript, it must execute the script. So this entire rendering process and this entire flow of creating these trees is like halted while that script is executed. So just want to put a little context there because that's a term we hear a lot. Okay, our wonderful render rule child tree then turns into layout. So layout is kind of the drawing, this recursive process that draws out every single box in CSS. And by box, I mean DOM element. After that, we have paint. So once that layout, and I think of it as like a blueprint, so an outline of our page, and those individual boxes are then turned into kind of tiny images. So we have a bunch of different images. So every single box, all the CSS properties relevant to the paint stage are applied, and we have that combination of images. Then composite. So all of those images are then kind of squished together, one big like snapshot's taken into one image. So that's the composite step. So every web page you look at is really a big image. That is rendering. And I think CSS, kind of how I've formulated it in my mental model, CSS is a domain-specific language for this process. So CSS developers program the layout of web pages or boxes. 100%. I think of myself as a box programmer. Programmers of boxes. This kind of works for me. Okay, switching gears a little bit. Let's talk about algorithms. Oh, little friend. This is a portrait of me in 2nd grade. Some buck teeth. Okay. Algorithms. Another definition. An algorithm is a well-defined computational procedure that takes input and produces output. This is from a book called Introduction to Algorithms by Thomas Corman that I think is assigned in most computer science classes. And it is extremely dense, and I've read the first chapter. But I figured this was a really good place to get the definition of algorithm from. So I like to use this little framework for thinking about algorithms. We have our input, perhaps an unsorted list, and our output, a sorted list. Shocker. What happens in between a sorting algorithm? Let's think of some sorting algorithms. Bubble sort, selection sort, merge sort, quick sort. I decided to stop there. They're similarly named. Let's look at the implementation of a sorting algorithm. Does anybody know what this is? Which sorting algorithm this might be? Bubble sort. Bubble sort's kind of a joke among algorithms people, I suppose, because it's not very performant, but it's very, I would say it's the most introductory algorithm. It's nice to learn. So this is our imperative JavaScript. And I'll give this a little heart because we like JavaScript. And we can see the control flow here. So the for loops, the if statement, the manipulation of the order of execution of these statements. So if this were kind of under the declarative paradigm, this is all we would see. We would just see the what. So that sorting algorithm is obscured behind the function call itself, the declarative part. Okay, let's think about a different kind of algorithm. What if we have a tall row of boxes, and I want all the boxes to be in a row here? So, as a box programmer, what kind of algorithm might I write to make all these boxes go into a row? We have several options. One, display flex. Okay. Float left. Gasp. How dare you? Floats still have their place in our world today. Okay, now, let's look at the implementation of display flex in my box program. Wow! Oh my god! A CSS algorithm. Declarative CSS. Give it a heart. Cool. Nice. I don't have to do too much. Okay, so I think the important part here about CSS and kind of the way we looked at that bubble sort algorithm and the sort call, and we see display flex, it's really like this. So our declarative code is at the tip of the iceberg, and it is powered by all of this imperative code that's happening underneath in the browser. So CSS is the tip. C++ and Rust are what's powering our CSS. I mean, okay. So I took it upon myself to do some investigating and look at Rust code. So this is perhaps the implementation of Flex Wrap in Servo, which is the rendering engine in Mozilla Firefox. This is imperative Rust Firefox. It might be that. But it was a very interesting exercise to spend many hours kind of going back and forth between the spec and figuring out exactly where these things are happening in CSS. It's really cool. So where did I look at this? This is on GitHub. Servo is open source. It's on GitHub. And the code base is pretty new because it's a rewrite of the rendering engine. So it's commented. It's up to date. And like I said, my process was to go back and forth between the spec and the browser source, because the spec is literally instructions and a specification for what browser vendors are to implement. And so there are one-to-one relationships between what's in the spec and what's in the browser. Okay, so good for you, Laura. You looked at a bunch of Rust. Well, there's a point. This is when CSS went from like, okay, whatever, CSS, to, wow, oh my God, CSS, my favorite programming language. This is awesome. Because every time I would write CSS before, it was more like this. So I don't know, has anybody ever programmed with a hammer? Or like done something kind of like that where you're like, just work. Like I have the same 6 things in the back of my mind I'm going to try and it'll work eventually. So no. So now I kind of have this mental model for what a browser is doing and what's happening and what these declarative algorithms, so to speak, are doing. So I approach CSS with a whiteboard marker much more. And that involves pseudocoding. So I have a nice pad next to where I work that I just kind of pseudocode out my boxes before I need to do anything with CSS. And taking that moment to pseudocode, give it a heart, helps extremely. And I use this framework, this kind of input algorithms output. Where inputs are, this was for a particularly challenging ocean image hero thing. That's all I'm going to say about it. And I needed to get it in a specific position. And I was like, what is the algorithm for this thing? Okay. And it was lots of stuff. So we had CSS grid, some flexbox, some var, calc, like all these extremely powerful CSS properties we have access to. What did this look like? What is, said algorithm going to look like? Okay. Here's a big block of CSS. Give us a second. In March of 2018. That's kind of when I wrote this. And when I was incorporating this into my talk, I was like, okay, this is some CSS I wrote that I like really broke down and thought about it kind of as algorithms. Then in November 2018, I looked at this code again and I was like, ugh, like what was I thinking? Has anybody felt like that about their code before? Just like all of a sudden you're like, what happened? Like what happened that this code was so weird? And so I know exactly what happened. And that is that I got a job. So I got a job. And this is my first job in 7 years of freelancing. And I'm a design engineer at Penske Media Corporation working on big websites like the Rolling Stone and Variety and like 15 others. And it's a totally different set of problems. So of course I look at my code differently. I'm going to give lots of hearts here because I like my job. And also, I want to make it known that the way I got this job was by making a friend through a WordPress meetup in New York City in like 2014. And there were no algorithms interviews involved. I didn't even apply online. So just wanted everybody to know that that can happen in the real world. So anybody looking for a job, it can be extremely frustrating. You have all of my sympathy, but it will happen for you, I promise. Okay, so next. Prefixing this with a little bit of a yellow light, because these are ideas I'm still figuring out for myself a little bit, but I'm excited to share them. So we have our definition of algorithm, well-defined computational procedure. So I think this is what bothered me about my old big block of code, is that, okay, it could be kind of well-defined. There are parts of it that are very well-defined. Like, okay, flex, we had some grid going on, flex, min width, width calculations, some height assignment. But I think what was getting me is that this is kind of like a long method code smell, a little bit. So for anybody unfamiliar, the long method code smell is when you have a very long function or method or something where there's just too much happening in there for everything to be useful. So it's all locked away in this one function. It can kind of get unruly. So how do you deal with a long method code smell? Well, oh no. Oh, look at that. Look how happy they are. Nice little weird snakes. Okay, so now we arrive at the single responsibility principle. So every one of our little worm friends here can have one responsibility and can go off and do that really well. Another slightly more useful metaphor would be kitchen tools. So we have kitchen tools, like a wooden spoon's great at being a spoon, a whisk is great at whisking, etc. I was trying to think of a tool that tries to do more than one thing, and I thought of one. Does anybody recognize this? This This is a spork. So when's the last time you used a spork? I mean, for me, not a long time. I mean, I'm sorry, spork, but you're trying to do too much. So sad. Okay, so before we get into more code, a quick refresher of some CSS terminology here. So selector is the thing you're styling. Property and value. Declaration. Rule. I spent many years mixing these up and kind of using them interchangeably. This is the official terms. We're going to have another definition by me. A CSS algorithm is a well-defined declaration or set of declarations that produces a specific styling output. And by specific styling output, we mean rendering of boxes. Okay, now it's time to look at some general purpose CSS algorithms. Number 1, clearfix. Okay, so here's kind of our input for a clearfix. Apply the clearfix algorithm. There's our output. So the clearfix has 2 floated elements around the wrapping container and clears both of them. Positioning. So I want to stick the top text there kind of above the block and outside of it, but I want it to stay right there in relation to the white box. Outer thing, position relative. Sticky thing, position absolute. There we go. Stick me somewhere. I want to point out these 2 kind of flexible values here. So if you were thinking about this as something, I mean, this is pretty rudimentary CSS, but if you were thinking about pulling this out into something else, maybe these would be 2 values you could manipulate somewhere. Aspect ratio. One way. There are many ways to do an aspect ratio. Okay. This is my friend's mom's dog named Tuffy. And I was trying to think of a good picture for this slide, and I decided a fat corgi is a great picture. So here's our aspect ratio algorithm. So the image container is the div that's containing this IMG, and it has a border around it. So if we uncomment these slowly, add some positioning. So we're telling the image to assume the size of its container, which has no size, because if the image is positioned absolutely, it doesn't have any size, unless its parent does. So we add some padding bottom. And Tuffy's a little bit squished. So we need to tell the image itself, so kind of the file that's inside that image DOM element, to cover the image. I would recommend reading up on object fit. It's very interesting. Okay, cool. And if we were to pull out any values here to be manipulated elsewhere, there would be this 2/3. So that's kind of our aspect ratio. Okay, arrow with borders. Anybody used this one before? Google CSS arrow, copy paste. Yes, this is what you're copy pasting. The algorithm. So borders are really cool. Another one I recommend looking up. Fluid type. This one I've been kind of into recently. So we have a font size, kind of a static font size added to 3 VW. So that's a viewport width. So that's 3% of the width of the viewport. But I don't want it to keep growing forever, so someone on their 24-inch iMac sees gigantic text that might get too big. So I want to put a bound on that at 800 pixels. And so I can adjust this calculation to stop at 800 pixels. So these are our different flexible values here. And we'll take a look at what this looks like, just to give you some context. So kind of see slowly shrinking text, it's subtle, and it stops growing at one point. So if we turn this into a monster Sass mixin, this is what it would look like. So I pulled out those three different values into something that can be edited or applied differently. So last algorithm here. Does anybody recognize this one? This is FizzBuzz. So FizzBuzz is one of these kind of silly algorithms you learn if you start learning computer science, or you don't learn for 5 years and then go to an interview and they ask you FizzBuzz and you're like, what are you talking about? Why would you ever do this? But you can do FizzBuzz in CSS. That's really cool. And I would highly encourage anyone who receives FizzBuzz as a question to do that. Okay, so cool. That's awesome. All this cool CSS algorithms. But then I'm like, CSS algorithms? Oh my God, Laura. Like, really? Are you going to call these things algorithms? So it depends on the day whether or not I'm like, heck yes, algorithm, CSS is programming, yes. Or I'm like, CSS is not programming. What is going on? So I was like, I need a word for this. Like, what is a word for this thing that I'm talking that makes so much sense to me? And then it like hit me, like, no doy, like, duh, we have a word for this. Patterns. These are patterns. So here's me. I'm like, CSS algorithms. And the rest of the CSS community is all like, all these things, like patterns, all this stuff already exists. I think it's so interesting when we're programming and or coding and figuring out stuff for ourselves. It's like the one thing that makes sense to you. It's like parallel thinking in a lot of ways. It's really interesting. So I kind of see what I talk about as CSS algorithms as all of these other concepts in terms of structuring CSS and making kind of assigning logic to the chaos that CSS can be. It's like my way of filtering all of that through maybe the computer science things I learned. So a CSS algorithm is a well-defined declaration or set of declarations that produces a specific styling output. Yes, we can also say a CSS pattern is these things. So another quick yellow light here, because I want to show a few things I'm working on at work that we're doing at PMC that are kind of along these lines of thinking algorithmically about CSS. So first is a pattern for L features, so a features layout. This is a namespace. So if anybody's seen namespaces before in CSS. So this is the namespace for the pattern, kind of categorizing what the pattern or algorithm is. And then I have a specific grid algorithm in here. And this is the documentation for features layout. I kind of was playing around with actually using boxes in the documentation, which works pretty well because you can easily see inconsistencies in what this specific algorithm is doing. So this is kind of the output of that algorithm. So here's the homepage of IndieWire.com, which is using these many of these patterns. And L features is supporting the layout here. One little tiny part of the layout. Lots of other patterns going on. If we look at the markup for this, like this type of CSS and thinking about these algorithms, little like single or specific responsibility packages of styles, ends up looking kind of like this. So some things are a little BEM-esque, but then there are other parts where you're kind of layering on these algorithms. And it seems to work pretty well. And again, like a lot of these concepts are mirrored in other CSS architectures and patterns and things. So another one, this is slightly experimental using a data attribute. So this is that kind of general purpose positioning algorithm, if you will, that we looked at before, using a U namespace. So the purpose of this algorithm is to glue, so utility glue this little caption into a corner of an image. And we also set or kind of expose a custom property, if you will, for the transform. Okay, so this is what this might look like. And we have some more namespaces. And setting that uglue transform moves our thing over, our little caption over a little bit. It's kind of like an API, the way this works. I'm like, CSS APIs? And then I'm like, whoa, slow down. I don't know. Okay, cropping. Cropping is like a super useful thing to package up to use elsewhere. So in the future, PMC core patterns NPM package, we might have a mix in like this. So this is packaging up that cropping algorithm and making those two values, kind of exposing those two values for use elsewhere. And using Sass, we can generate class names based on an array of data. So any given project, let's say it needs specific ratios, we can add those to this ratios array and generate the class names. And this would be a core pattern namespace, so I can kind of drop this into other, to a website that might already have namespacing. Ugh. Maybe this, I'm kind of like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this a little bit. I think good still, but a lot of code on slides. Okay, so how do you write CSS algorithms, so to speak? Well, let me go through how to write an algorithm as it is described in Cracking the Coding interview. So first you plan your algorithm on a whiteboard. Then you come up with a brute force solution, so something that works. Doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, but it works. Then when you walk through it, kind of figure out the different parts of your algorithm that maybe need optimization, does it achieve its goal? And then you optimize that solution. So if we're programming boxes, we can use the same concepts. So we pseudocode the boxes, plan out what you're doing, write some smelly CSS, so this is your brute force solution. Figure out what those algorithms are. So in this walkthrough part, it's like figure out exactly what you're trying to do. What are the core declarations that are providing that functionality. And then give them some names and some selectors. So pull them out into different functionality. And just to kind of mention, like, there's not one way to write CSS. Of all the languages, of course, CSS is, there's so many ways to write CSS, and it's so dependent on you and your project and your team. So I don't want any of this to come off as like, you should be doing this, write CSS like this. But consider it. It's kind of interesting to hear other ideas and other styles. So in this algorithms framework, so to speak, kind of have our component and our output like this. So anything can fit into this structure. And then what's the algorithm? So you figure that out. And if you're having trouble figuring it out, break it down to something smaller. So one specific part of that component, what do you need to style? And so then this becomes more feasible. So transform positioning gets us into a position. So programming in any language is kind of like this. Well, not always, but start with, get something on the screen. Like, you gotta start with something. So write some code and then gradually transform it into a beautiful flower. So, but the idea is, like, it's never gonna be, I totally fall victim to this where I'm like, oh, but I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this. It's like, just write it. If you're gonna change it, it's all gonna change. It's okay. It's gonna be a beautiful flower at the end. And with CSS specifically, I'm going to need to be careful about how we talk about CSS. There's a wonderful article by Rachel Andrew called The Way We Talk About CSS. And we say this a lot about CSS. So, like, it's weird. CSS is weird. I myself say this. And this kind of translates to, like, it's CSS that's the problem. CSS is faulty or, like, unintentional, not a well-designed language, or something like that. And that's just not true. CSS is declarative and domain-specific, as we now know. Unique and resilient. So a little homework assignment for everyone. Try to catch yourself when you're like, CSS is weird. Like, this is just weird. What's going on? Be like, oh, wait, read the spec. So I had this idea for a really annoying app called the Mindful CSS Bell. That would be, go off every 30 minutes or something. Maybe it could, like, link up to your text editor and could tell if you're in a CSS file, and then it'd be like, read the spec. Here's a little worm. I just wanted to have him come back in somewhere. It's really funny. Okay. Conclusion. Back to our wonderful bridge triangle here. So another way to look at this is, so we have engineering, design, and product. So the thing is, like, we all speak different languages. Like, completely, we're all really good at different things. So when we're talking about something like product uses a different word than an engineer would, and design uses yet a different word. So when we're talking about what is the bridge between all these disciplines, I think it's the user interface. So the interface, or the kind of what we're building, is something everybody at a company can point to and say, like, oh, this thing, like, we're looking at it, this thing. Also known as the front end. So also known as HTML and CSS and JavaScript. I'm going to say, this is definitely not an anti-JavaScript talk, let me put that out there. But I'm going to say JavaScript's not really part of this solution in the same way, because you can't sit down and learn JavaScript in 2 hours. You can do that with, I mean, you know, it might take a little longer, you know, more or less time for any given person, but HTML and CSS are such accessible languages that anybody from any part of a company can sit down and understand the basic concepts. And so we can come up with a language that points to something specific, like patterns. So, like, this pattern does this thing, and then we can all talk about things in terms of patterns. So it's really like this, patterns. And then in engineering, you can be like, algorithms. Okay. Thank you all so much. Yay. So,
So we have some time for questions. We have a mic runner, so please raise your hand if you have a question. Wait until the mic's with you so that everyone on the live stream can also hear your question. I see the mic runner is looking for the mic. Yes. So who has the first question for today? Where are we going to make him run? Not yet. So I have a question. I wrote it down during the presentation, because I know that I'd be nervous getting up here again. So how will CSS algorithms play a role in designing and developing Gutenberg blocks?
Oh, Okay, this is a good question. So something we've been doing at PMC a little bit is working on including these algorithms, so to speak, or small patterns in like Webpack entry points. So splitting these little tiny chunks of functionality out, it's really easy to pull them in different places. So I feel like with in Gutenberg, if you've played with blocks before, worked with blocks, you have a block.js where you're importing style.scss and you're importing your dependencies. And for any given block, you import the patterns or the algorithms that you're using in that block. So, and anything working, if there is a separate CSS build for the front end, they can import that same SAS file or that same CSS file. So it could be a future way of consolidating your CSS. Yeah, because I definitely, with Gutenberg, I was like, oh my God, there's like more CSS files now. And if you really want what you see is what you get, you might have a lot of redundancy on what's in the editor as well as what's in the front end. So in this way, splitting things out, we can have a single partial.
Thank you. So any other questions? Yeah, I see a question over here.
Hello, thank you for the talk. It was awesome.
Yeah.
So have you ever looked into using other algorithms, such as like cassowary algorithm, and importing that into your CSS, and then using that as like a layout?
What algorithm?
Cassowary. So Apple uses the cassowary algorithm to do their layout on their website. So I mean, like taking other algorithms and bringing them into CSS, and then using CSS to position things on the page.
I am not familiar with that algorithm, so I don't have 100% of the context for your question. Is this an algorithm that is kind of translated to layout, or is it specifically an algorithm for layout, or is it like, oh, this algorithm does this thing, let's see what that would be like in layout?
It calculates the distance between two divs or elements.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. That's kind of what, I mean, I honestly think of design systems as like one big algorithm in a lot of ways. So if you have kind of a spacing system set up in a certain way, I think that would maybe be analogous. But yes is the answer.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have another question here in the front. Oh,
Tough.
there was another one spotted. Yeah, very good.
Sorry about that. I loved your talk about getting that shared language, and I was curious, you talked about the engineers and kind of the designers getting that shared language. Any advice on how you bring that third pillar up to speed as you get like a new client to using that language of patterns?
I think having a pattern library is a good way to start. So documentation. You could even create some kind of nice walkthrough experience. So I mean, I feel like doing agency work would be a real sweet spot for having these kind of patterns and systems figured out internally, because then you can just like pump them out, essentially. I mean, with good quality. So I would say taking care to have that step and saying like, okay, this thing on the page, this like collection of 3 widgets in a row, this is what this is called. Period. We call it this, and to make sure there is that one-to-one relationship with what you're pointing to and what it is in the code. Yeah.
So let's say you were going to do another repeat of your Twitter poll in a few months, and if kind of that goal was increasing the I don't knows, like what are the things that make the biggest dent in getting like more I don't knows from either side? Like what are the things that are changing about how people perceive CSS, or the changes that are happening in the CSS at the spec level or in browsers? Like what are the things that are changing in the next 6 months that are going to make the I don't know go up?
Yeah. So this is not the last 6 months, but CSS grid, and there's also a spec for like logical properties and values. So there's a lot of declarative logic that's going to be baked into CSS. But even I think grid is just such a great example because it's an extremely well-designed like layout API and layout interface for programming. And I think also Houdini is a really big thing. I don't know, is anybody familiar with Houdini in here? So Houdini is it is a JavaScript API, but it allows you to create new CSS properties and have access to the rendering pipeline at at the paint layer. So you can create your own CSS properties. And now there is a CSS API for doing that as well. So you can literally create a new property in your CSS file. Also, big one, custom properties, so which are AKA CSS variables. I like the term custom properties though, because that is what they are. Yeah, that's what I would say. Good question.
So, question from me.
Yeah.
When I first started learning CSS about 10 years ago, one of the things I really enjoyed was going to some websites that are really pushing the bounds of what is feasible and just CSS with no JavaScript or anything. One of my favorites at the time was CSS Play with Stu Nichols' personal project over in the UK. I was wondering if there are any resources or websites that you enjoy frequently finding experimental, new, hacky ways of throwing things together.
So labs.jensimmons.com, specific answer. So Jen Simmons is a design advocate for Mozilla, and she does a lot of work kind of with the CSS working group, like evolving CSS and also the developer tools in Firefox to accommodate playing around with CSS. But on her website, labs.jensimmons.com, she has a lot of really interesting layout experiments. And also keep an eye on CSS tricks. There's always really cool or like in-depth tutorials that come out about like, hey, I did this weird thing. And it's like, oh, writing modes are really cool. That's a small, also that, so.
All right, any other questions? Now's your chance. None? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Yay.
Please give her a big hand. And in 15 minutes, we'll continue here with the final presentation for today. sitting on the end of a row, please scoot into the middle because there are people coming in and they don't want to go lap to lap to a free seat in the center. So be nice, keep the seats on the edges free. While you're doing that, you may be sitting next to someone you don't already know. So this is the perfect time to introduce yourself, meet that new friend, business partner. You know, this is what WordCamp's about. It's about meeting new people and making friends in the industry. And waiting for a talk to start is the perfect time to do so. Also, I want to remind you that when you're going to the after party tonight, which starts at 8 at the Science Museum, you have to bring your badge. They're not letting you in if you don't bring your badge, no matter how pretty or familiar your face is. No lies, Mika. You have to bring your badge. If you want to bring a +1, make sure that he or she has a badge too. If they don't already, go to registration and they will help you solve that for the fair price of a ticket to WordCamp US. They're nice people, really. If you haven't picked up your swag, please do so. Tomorrow they're going to be a bit more lenient in giving out sizes, switching sizes if you accidentally filled out the wrong one, etc. So then you may end up without your t-shirt, which would be a shame. So do that before the end of the day, so you can enjoy your beautiful WordCamp US swag. It's almost time to start. But there are still a lot of people coming in, so let's wait 1 more minute. And then our room manager is closing doors and we'll get started. Meanwhile, in that minute, we are going to do a little exercise because the room is pretty wide, as you may have noticed. So that makes it the perfect place for a wave. I'm going to start on this side, and I'm not going to keep up, I hope. So you can start the wave. 3, 2, 1. Hey! Come on, come on, come on, come on. Faster, 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 faster. You can do this. Brilliant. Applause for yourself. All right, and with that, the doors are closed, and we are going to start with our final presentation for today. Please meet our last speaker for today in guitar. She lives in the UK and works remotely for Automatic, where she's working on the WordPress.org project full-time. She's currently the design lead of the editor focus of Gutenberg. Her background is varied and includes psychology, art, design, development, and UX. She's overall passionate about open source and its communities. And in her free time, she's a passionate blogger, photographer, and enjoys doing yoga. And as a true dog lover, she spends her quality time with her 4-legged best friends whenever she can. Please welcome on stage our last speaker for today, Tammy Lister.
Thank you. Products with stories are powerful. Every product, of course, has a story. The story of how it's made, the story of how it's used. Those products that embrace, celebrate, and are guided by the stories, those are the ones that shine. Think, for example, of an advert campaign. Those often tell stories in them. We grow up hearing stories, and they continue to resonate with us, telling the story of the product, making us connected to them. When a story is good, the bond with a product is incredibly powerful. This connection, the remembering, the actual emotional bond made by a passionate emotional experience, this is what you want from a product. Think about the reason you buy a particular brand. Think about the reason you use a particular site or an experience. Likely you have a deep bond and a connection with that. The story is strong. The things we own also have stories. The experiences we've had with them, for example. Maybe it's a ring that someone beloved gave you, or your favorite t-shirt that when you wear it, really good things happen to you. Or the stone that maybe you carry in your product that you are convinced brings you good luck every time you have it there. If we have emotion when using, that connection becomes even stronger. From clothing to things we own, it's actually human nature to attach the experience to the object. For example, let's take a simple tea bowl. There's a story to the experience of using that. The tea that maybe you make on a cold day and you wrap your hands around the bowl for warmth. I have one myself that I drink daily from, and as I do, this feeling of calm embraces because it's that ritual of the experience that I have when I use it. And digital experiences also have stories attached to them. That time, for example, you got delight from using a particular filter in Instagram of a really amazing moment that you shared. Those moments, just like any story, unfold in the experience. And our digital footprints tell stories. Your Instagram feed, or perhaps your Twitter memories. Google actually taps into this with something called Remember This Day. Our digital stories are powerful and catalogued. Timelines show the life we've led, telling our story in binary. Stories are actually tied to our genetics, our very essence of being. They have been shared in every culture as a means of experience and entertainment, education, and instilling morals or actually cultural preservation. When we have a good experience, we share it. We tell the story. Because as humans, we are storytellers. You likely have already told one, if not many, many stories already today through the people that you've interacted with. We even actually tell stories in our sleep. I saw this tweet a few weeks ago from the Obama Foundation. The shared story allowing you to see through someone's eyes resonated really strongly with me. This shows the power of stories. By being told, stories can bring about change. And this is because storytelling actually predates writing. Earliest forms of storytelling combined gestures and expressions and were entwined with rituals. For example, rock art, it's thought, may have actually served as storytelling. Indigenous people in Australia painted symbols from stories on cave walls. And this was a way to actually help the storyteller remember the story. That story was then told with a mixture of spoken word, music, rock art, and dance, this kind of combination. People have used even the carved trunks of trees and even sand or leaves to actually record stories. And tattooing has also, in complex form, represented stories and information about genealogy, affirmation, and social status. Stories bring about connection. They bring about empathy and insight into someone else's life. They convey often more than facts. They are narratives that activate certain parts of the brain when we hear them. This allows connection, and by linking to your own experiences, relatability is one of the essential ingredients of all stories. Because you have that, you relate it. And this connection also tightens recall. An experience is shared. This is the reason, as children, we tell ghost stories at night during sleepovers. Or around campfires, we tell the stories, and parents read to their children. Through stories you learn, and humanity is passed on. Stories actually have a structure, and by knowing that and these basic principles, you can use this in creating a product. I'm going to take a little bit of a look at that now. There are some critical elements of a story, and these are plot, characters, and narrative point of view. It's important that most stories also have a conflict of some form. We're going to get to that a little bit later, but it's really important to think of when creating in products. A classic structure could be seen something like this. I'm going to go through each section, and as I do, you're probably going to start making connections of how stories form. This, though, isn't a smooth arc, and often it's represented as a story arc as this lovely smooth experience. Well, I would encourage you to start to see the bumps, the staggers, and not think of this as literally an arc. These points also aren't set, they shift and adjust with each story. More or less, though, most have these. So we start with the beginning. This is a setting and exposition. This is the once upon a time, where the heroic character starts generally from humble beginnings, and this sets up the tale to be told. Next, you have the conflict, a problem. All good stories, as I said, come from a point of conflict. Something happens to trigger a change, and then this reaction happens, the story. And then you have a rising action, something that solves the problem. The aforementioned crisis is now being solved. At this point, often stories can get a little bit more complicated, and layers happen, sometimes more and more add up. And turns and plot twists spiral to reach the next point. Then you have the culmination, the core of a problem. Finally, at some point you reach this, and this could be the final race for something, or maybe the monster is slayed. Perhaps it's not an end as much as knowing what the quest involves to finally complete it. And there's maybe more story that can come after a crisis. The story doesn't necessarily end there. Whatever it means, the story arc has reached a peak. And often this point comes as a pause, a breath of relief after a hectic, frantic emotion. And then you have this falling action. This leads to solving a problem. After you get to the core of the problem, this happens. Maybe this is the after effect. But often, though, this is the effect of knowing the core problem and solving it. For example, knowing where the final treasure is. And finally, after the long journey, we come to the outcome, how something is solved. Usually, this results in a change for the heroic character. Often the world is changed through the arc. They are back at a point, yet they're not right back. A change has happened, and yet this is the happy ever after. Folklorists sometimes divide all tales into two main groups of Märchen and Sagen. Really, forgive my pronunciation, these are German words, and the rough translations of these is fairy tales and legends. The first is Märchen. These are the once upon a time tales. The stories we are used to attaching the word story to. The tales of our childhood, the castle, the enchanted forest. This world is separate and other from the one that we exist. Then you have Sagen. These are the stories passed on to each other. They actually happened and are of a very, very particular time and place. This is actually their power. These are the stories you want to tell in a product. As we create products, we want to create legends. We want to enable our heroines and heroes to succeed. And all products have a story. The stories hold the product together. And in many ways, it survives based on its own story arc. A product has several different types of stories that it's worth kind of identifying now. The first is the story of those that experience it. Then you have the story you attach to it. For example, have you ever given your phone a backstory of emotional intent? I know I have. Or the story of how something is actually made is the third story. And people buy better versions of themselves over just products. You've likely heard the term selling the dream. And whilst you ethically want to be cautious of this, you have to think when creating a product about enabling a better self. And if you feel icky, because it can feel icky to start talking about selling, but what if it's enabling someone to earn a living? What if it allows them to send flowers to someone in a different continent they haven't seen for years? Or what if it allows them to tell their really important story through a blog? Dreams can be big or small, just like stories. Airbnb really get that storytelling is important. Stories are so important, they have an entire section devoted to them. They are selling the future story, the one of belonging. And the story of the production of an object is often nowadays as important as the story trying to be sold. Production being ethical is also a story to sell in itself with brands like Everline. Their brand is built on these words: know your factories, know your costs, always ask why. They believe in radical transparency and declare this on their site. And Matt and Nat actually embrace telling stories in their product. For example, in the label, you actually see this, saying where the product, what it contains. And it shows the production story in the lining. Many manufacturers are doing this, showing the story of how something is made, where it comes from. And companies like Patagonia recognize the stories you create with their products. They see the bonding, the value, and the long-lasting relationships. They have this scheme called Wornwear, where they see and they're trying to have a lot more of their products repaired. There are even videos telling the stories of the years that people have spent with each of the garments. It shows also those that do the repairs and the letters that are sent in when the products are also sent in, telling the story of why it's important to be repaired. And products, by their very form, can cause stories to be told. Monzo, which is a kind of a banking system, has this incredibly strong color. Every time I use the card, I get asked, what is that? Being noticeable allows the product to be sold itself by existing. I tell the story because people see that bright card and they ask about it. I find myself over and over telling the product's tale. Because using the product is incredibly delightful, I'm telling that experience. I willingly tell that story every time because it's so positive. But just like a positive experience tells a story, so does a bad one. We then attach a tragedy to a product. It might not even be the product itself. What about if you've had a really bad customer experience? I've had this myself with Fitbit, because products actually break, but my own experience involved repeated breaking, and whilst in the end it was replaced, my trust had been broken. I had to also fight for a result and didn't have a great experience with that, because my trust was just gone forever. And you may tolerate using it, I used it afterwards, but the delight has gone from the experience. Our product hearts are incredibly fragile, delicate, and easily broken. Similarly, a good support experience can turn everything around. I had myself this experience recently with Airbnb. I had a really interestingly bad booking, and it turned good by a full refund and incredible attention to customer care. Products also tell their own stories, and we attach stories to them. For example, this example of saying that the MacBook was breathing. Humanizing inanimate objects is a very, very human thing to do. I do this all the time, and I suspect that most of you do as well. This comes down to the very human nature of bonding. You attach and, as a result, infer around an inanimate object. This is a mixture of delight, emotion, and attachment. So stories are really important. How do you actually discover them? Well, assuming stories or telling the story of someone else is far from the best route. You start, quite simply, by listening. Likely, you are being told stories, but you're not hearing them. From support calls through to testimonials, the stories are being told. Even issues or bugs reported have their own story. It's really just about listening to them. And just like a friend is there for you and supports, be there for your stories. Researching stories loosely forms, or I'm going to kind of put it loosely, into two types. And these are going to be short and long. You can also see this as surface and deep. Just having surface stories isn't really going to be something to guide your product with. They are a good instant hit, great to have, but don't fall into the trap of thinking they are going to be representative or give you deep insights. A good way of thinking about this is temperatures. But a word of caution, short stories, often because they're real ease, have a whole truckload full of bias. For example, social media or reviews. A Twitter comment isn't a long story and really doesn't have an in-depth plot. Long stories give you a fuller picture, but by their very nature are far more intensive to run. If you want to get deep, stories to power your product, then you need to dive into long stories. But you can daily swim amongst the short stories. Phasing in and out is really important to not drain research and also keep those hunches that you have true when you're making the product. It's important to note when telling the stories of users, you need to make sure you show all aspects and cover a wide range. Just limiting brings issues. So there's this story that's told in a lot of cultures about, without seeing, people describing, for example, an elephant by touch. So maybe someone who is feeling the head says this is a pot. Or maybe if someone's feeling an ear, says it's a basket. The tusk, a plowshare. The trunk, a plow. Or maybe the foot, they're saying a pillar. Without knowing the full picture, how can you actually know what you're creating? This comes with knowing the stories. It's also important everyone involved in the product process gets involved in researching these stories. So once you've discovered all the amazing stories, there's a step that quite often people miss. That's actually keeping them. The stories need processing, logging, and to be available for everyone that works on the product today and will in the future. Otherwise, what was the point in listening? This isn't just about presentation. It's important to have a place to store and easily search. That's like the baseline for these stories. I'm not talking about fancy personas or distilling either. This is about having a place to log these precious stories, having it searchable for that future archaeology. Presenting the stories is going to be the next step to keeping them. Once you've logged them in the raw format, you need to, depending on what works for your team, distill them and present. There are many different ways of doing this, and not just personas. I'm not actually going to suggest the right way. I'll give you a guide here, because it really depends on the team and who you are delivering this to. Make sure that everyone comes to the team is actually onboarded through the stories. This is crucial, as it sets the tone and ensures rapid immersion. You then all speak the same language. Remember the tradition of stories being learning? Do that in your onboarding. When someone joins the team, being able to have the stories told fast tracks them to the understanding. The product narrative should be shared as part of everyone's welcome. And once you have the stories, once you have them being listened to and are part of the onboarding, what now? Well, now it's time to take the stories into the product themselves. This is where the stories begin to make real change. They come alive over just being told word for word. The value of stories can be directly seen in teams. You might be asking, how can that be seen? Well, they keep the focus on the user for a start. And this perhaps is the biggest one, as they're there right in the center. You can't escape them as their story is being told. It also enables collaboration and sharing. This levels up as you listen to people saying, for example, what would Mary say about this, and what would her experience be, and then telling the story of Mary. Stories also fuel creativity. They also enable faster product cycles by setting your team off on the right path. Everyone is on the same page, being told the same stories, united. And stories activate people. You see this in children being told stories. It makes us experience and live that story. Crafting these into the product creation process taps into creativity that is otherwise sometimes locked. And this often leads to more exploration and safety, to making those leaps when you have this creativity. Because there's that bond of the story mixed with the potency of the experience. It's a powerful conception to design a product in. These stories need to be told everywhere they can. If you have a physical space, put them around on your walls, in your lunchrooms and in your breakout areas. Maybe you make physical storybooks. Whatever, they should be part of your space as a product team. And remote is no excuse either. These stories should be spoken in meetings. They should be easily seen everywhere the remote team actually interacts. This goes back to the presentation of stories and adapting that for the team. Any product decisions should also involve the stories because they back up and fuel it. Tell them in review meetings and ensure the voice of the users drowns out the latest hotness technique or design trend. And whilst I did know it doesn't really matter how you show the stories, it's really quite useful and good to have some visualization. Remember the indigenous stories from Australia combining mediums? Well, that's an incredibly effective way to tell the story and have it recalled by everyone on your team. A good tip is to get everyone to actually experience visualizing the stories. This is where some people are going to cry, I am not an artist. But you can do this, everyone can be involved. Getting people to actually draw and interact visually with these isn't just for the designers in the group. This should be something for every role. There are many easy methods you can use to visualize, and anyone can do it, no matter what their drawing ability. Story arts are possibly one of the simplest forms, and I'd encourage you to start exploring. You can read a little bit more with Donna Leachell's resources and book that I'd encourage everyone to check out. You start kind of with this current state of the character, and drawing this can also be really helpful. Then the story arc. Remember, we had this at the beginning. This seems familiar right now. A product can also have an arc. The experience is a story. Another basic but powerful method of telling stories is a storyboard. This literally can be stick people. Don't feel you have to create any great work of art here. One little tip is if someone resists drawing, get them to cut out pictures from photos or magazines and stick them together in a storyboard. It works just as well. User or customer journey maps are also a really easy format to follow. You have a timeline and there's actions along it, and there are a variety of ways to present this. If you're in a workshop mode, having a post-it timeline is a really great experience for everyone. You can then distill this and really use it in something. I've even seen people use Trello for this to catalog or plot. There are many, many approaches, but it's really key to physically do by placing on the arc or timeline. Just like with any of these visualizations, there are many key elements you need to ensure to be effective. And the first is experience. The actual doing of the visualization is crucial to recall. By creating this visual story, that's where engagement happens. Our brains are connected and the story is stronger. Then you have report. Anything that is done should also be reported to the entire product team. You might not have everyone there who's working on it, so making sure that you document and report it and always summarize the explorations is really important. Then archive. Keep a log of the work done. Don't throw it away. This could just be like the stories that you archive. But this also comes back to my early point of if you listen to a story, never lose it. This goes for visualizations or anything in a workshop, anything created. If someone joins in the future, they can use this to onboard and be on the same page as everyone. But again, make it easy to find. And then finally, review. Don't cast your work in stone and say it's done, put a bow on it. Your product will change. So will the stories. You need to go back, take the temperature, and go back to listening is really crucial. Otherwise, you're telling the story of the people in the past that used your product. So I've looked at both why it's important and how to find the stories and store them. However, how do you kind of take this into the actual product? You found them, you visualize them. Now is when you really take them, those arcs, and think about what the ideal map would be. Storytelling in a product can be seen as shifting between various phases. At the start, you explore, you imagine these stories, then you research, you listen to the stories. Next, you tell the stories, you visualize. Then, after the product is shaped by the stories. Working out product paths to achieve the ideal happy ever after is that stage. Remember the structure of a story? Think about an experience. There's a beginning, a conflict. Maybe that's sign up. Sign up's always a conflict. Think of the story arc. Maybe they get lost or end in a checkout, just abandoning their cart because the experience jarred for them. Maybe they tried to look for something and they couldn't, so they go and find it somewhere else. Perhaps they're trying to put their name into a checkout and it doesn't let them because of character or format limitations. Knowing these stories of crisis allows you to remove those obstacles and move the customers to success away from those harmful experiences. And there are several storytelling techniques you can employ in product design worth noting. The first is setting the scene. You need to ease in the experience. Every story starts with a once upon a time. Paint that picture. This is the welcome, the tone setting for the entire experience. Your first point sets this tone for interactions after. And expectations are set. Next, you cast your characters. Every part of the interaction and the experience is a character in a sense. Make sure you introduce them, have specific roles, and respect those interactions. Keep everything in the flow. For example, make sure your characters stay true. Having a form field change character partway through without any reasoning is incredibly disturbing for the person interacting. And then engagement is key to the flow of the story. Keep the pace. Move the reader or customer through the experience. Here is where you use that story arc, the tensions, the speed variations, all to bring the heroic success. The pace of an interaction is key, just fast enough, but not too fast. And then finally, you close the story or experience. This is the all lived happily ever after. The end is often just as important as the beginning. The closure of an experience is something we often forget. Changing the narrative of a story from a tragedy to a heroic tale should really be your goal. It doesn't have to be a full sword-wielding heroic tale either. Small tragedies add up to make a broken experience, but small wins also add up to a large, pleasant, heroic experience. Imagine once you see the story of a broken flow, you can't ignore it. You now create for it. That's the power of stories. It's worth noting a product also has this overarching story, but it also has little, even tiny subplots and stories of interactions. Right down to the story of a button click, the story of a form element. These little points are essential to understand. If you think of a great mystery, you don't know until the right at the very, very end what the kind of problem was. And this is the same for an experience. Often you don't know that that button is going to really break it, but it sure will be that tiny little button that is the problem. The flow of experience matters, just like storycraft. Craft that experience from start to end, because these tiny little details matter. Maybe it's a new way to find tea like this from Tea Pigs. Yet it's cute, and it's not going to work in all cases. But having these little details adds up in the context of their site and their experience. It's perfectly fitting to their tone. And you need to look at little ways that you can bring this and bring the story alive. So as designing for crisis sounds like something you really want to avoid, however, there's always a crisis in a story. There's the will they, won't they. And our brains love a little bit of peril. Just a little, not too much. Designing with this in mind in the experience can avoid distrust, because we tend not to trust things that work too well, that work too smoothly, too unreal. Something's too good to be true. A little way you can do this is with time, because being too fast can often be just as bad as being too slow for an experience. It's about balance. As someone overcomes a little something, they emerge changed for better by the story arc. How can you actually have that in your product? How can you give someone that win and that heroic journey? You need to think about that. But all of this has to be safe. The kind of thing I think about in this context is if you have an ice cream and it's melting, there's this will it, won't it, kind of with the melting. It's safe, it's not too traumatic, and that's what you really want to go for. Plot twists are a basic part of storytelling. And maybe it's something that works positively, unexpected, such as if you do a checkout and you have 10% automatically applied. That's a double delight. You got to be gifted something and didn't actually have to add a code in. It just happened for you. If you plot the story arcs, you can follow them and see the impact before creating. Then you build with firm foundations of insights. Before you add something, think about what is the story? What does this add to the overall experience? Because if you're following a story, adding something to it can actually unbalance it. For example, if you have a story set in deep space in the year 4000, If you were suddenly to add Gremlins from the 1980s, that kind of took a very different turn as a story. The story may start out to be vague, but it's one that appears over time. Let everything come into focus as you listen. Product design truly focused on stories means every decision is thought of as it changes the plot, the features, the characters, everything, how it impacts the experience. A lot of this comes down at the core of having a story-driven process, and this means all roles. Anyone working on the product, if stories are at the heart of what you're creating, then so are those of the stories you're telling. The product will be created from a place of authenticity and truth. Keeping a touch point on this is how you stay true to those stories. There should be this constant story stream from the sketches that you make at the start to the product's ideal story, to research and the product's real story over the years. The story of those who use the competition at the start that you learn about. The story of those telling and using your product over the years. This stream flows through your entire product creation experience, carrying along the team making it. These seeds of stories land throughout the product and grow. Stories are powerful. They're part of our genetic heritage. They teach us, guide us, and move us through the world. They fuel creation. By using them, you can change the narrative from tragedy to happy ever after, because they resonate with our very essence and souls. By putting stories at the heart of everything you do, your experience will improve. And yes, everyone will live happily ever after. Thank you.
So we have some time for questions. It doesn't have to be a full story. It can be a shorter question. Who's first?
That was a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do you take someone whose first experience is a bad story and help guide them to where a story is better for both of you?
So, I mean, the first place would be listening to what their bad story is, but you need to find ways to empower someone. If you think someone in a heroic tale, they find a magic weapon, right? And that weapon enables them to conquer or vanquish the monster. You need to find that for someone. Find whatever is the way that they are empowered, the way that they can grow. And not the way that you support them or just carry them with them helpless. That's not a particularly great heroic story. Generally, heroic tales don't involve the characters being carried. So yeah, it's just that way of just really empowering and finding, from listening, finding ways that you can give them back control and give them back that ability. Yeah.
Next question. Yeah.
Not a question. I just wanted to thank you for offering your slides online.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions. Last chance.
Everyone just wants to go to the after party.
Yeah, I think so.
Fortunately, the after party's not until 8.
Oh.
Yeah. And before we talk about the after party, there's one more thing that we absolutely do have to talk about. But first, big hand for Tammy. So what we very briefly do have to talk about is the people in the back of this room. You've probably seen the live transcription on the screens. You've seen the audio and the video work all day, so they did that. Please give a big hand for them as well. And then there is one thing standing between you and the after party. Dinner. Yep, that too. But that is your badge. If you don't bring your badge, there's no after partying. So don't forget it. Bring it along. It is your ticket to an amazing party at the Science Museum, starting at 8, and it will run until 11. So don't be late. See you at 8 at the Science Museum.